The main character picks up a large red tomato, delighted by its rich color, but immediately notices it is too sour, so he resolves to get a sweeter harvest next time, and someone turns to him. A pretty girl with cute ears and a tail calls him Mystery Soggy and says everyone else is here and waiting only for him while holding a basket of large red tomatoes in her right hand. Turning his head toward her, he looks at her, agrees with her, and says he'll come now. Isagi eagerly tells himself he wants a better life in this life. In the Empire of Remoris, at Remoris Castle, the corridors are lined with many knights in beautiful armor as a man calls the boy by name. He announces that, starting today, he is removing him from the position of court alchemist. The protagonist's eyes widen in surprise as he looks at the man, wondering. Isagi, bewildered, asks why he made that decision, and the man says he can handle the court alchemist's duties, surprised that Isagi would ask. He explains the court alchemist's main duty is to create magical weapons for the military, and the young man looks at him, startled. The man accuses the boy of neglecting his duties and only digging in the ground. With an indifferent expression, he looks at the scroll in his hands. He is Garius, head of the Imperial Alchemy Department. The boy refuses to agree, saying this is not a company in the ground. Isagi slips his right hand into his kaftan sleeve. The head of the Imperial Alchemy Department watches him. A man takes out a small bag, holds it up, and insists the other man look at it while claiming he uses alchemy to grow crops. Pointing to the bags in his hand, he says in an excited voice and with an angry expression that he grows varieties that will grow even in completely barren land. With a change in his voice, he calls this nonsense and says if there isn't enough food it should simply be taken by force. Propping his chin with one hand, he reaches the other forward and believes this method will be more effective. The boy trembles with anger, squeezing a bag of seeds in his left hand with all his strength and feeling fed up with everything. The Remoris Empire rose to power through aggression and conquest and devotes a large portion of its people to military service. Those irresponsible policies, he believes, make people suffer. He remembers seeing hungry children on the street. To save the country, he wanted to solve the food shortage with alchemy. Standing up abruptly, the head of the Imperial Alchemy Department plants his hands on the table and admits he had been neglecting his duties to tend the castle's fields, but says that behavior ends now. Asagi asks if he has been removed from his position. He thinks he's done his part, but knows he's just an ordinary orphan, so the man looks down on him. Hisagi still believes he was only doing what he had to do. He believes alchemy isn't meant to kill people and can be used to make them happy. Isagi glares at his now former boss, fury burning in his eyes. Garius half turns toward him and says he is free. Turning his whole body to face the young man, the man stares with cold indifference and then says alchemists must obey in silence. The man looks at him with disdain and thinks the department head sees alchemists as tools. Replying quietly, he says he understands and accepts the order. The protagonist walks through an empty city, past many different houses, and enters a building with a sign that says Sagi's workshop. By the door, he slips off his coat. The same girl calls him Mr. Asagi and says good morning. Mercia, a cute member of the beast race with ears and a ponytail at the back, asks him how his day was while smiling and holding a wooden tray with a cloth. Isagi enters the room with sadness in his eyes, throwing his jacket over his right arm, surprised that she has already arrived. Mercia works as a court servant. Between jobs, Mercia helps them in this workshop. The man remembers the time they spent together. They work together here to develop crops that grow in depleted soil. Sitting down in a chair, the protagonist exhales sadly. Seeing his condition, the girl looks perplexed. With concern in her voice, she suggests something is bothering him and looks at him with worried eyes. The girl asks what happened. The main character suddenly falls silent. He explains the whole situation to her sadly, telling her what really happened, and Mercy reacts loudly, shocked and finding it hard to believe. Angry, she says Mr. Asagi worked for the good of the Empire. Unable to accept this, she squeezes the paper tightly in her right hand and braces her other hand on the table. Confused by her overreaction, he holds his hands out in a conciliatory gesture to calm her, but Marcia remains furious and asks him if he is angry. The main character says calmly that he'd be lying if he claimed he wasn't angry, but her recognizing him was enough. Adding that it's good in another way, he earns a surprised look from Mercy and sincerely thanks her for caring so much, since he was an orphan and had been alone for a long time. Smiling, the man rests his hand on her chest and says he's glad she became his friend. She blushes slightly and calls him by name. Excited, she asks him what he'll do now. He scratches his cheek with his left index finger in bewilderment and hesitantly says he didn't expect to be fired, so he hasn't thought of anything yet. Touching his chin with two fingers in a thoughtful gesture, the protagonist wonders if they will be glad to see him back at the orphanage and if he can live and work there. The girl watches him. Her face flushes and she folds her arms, wondering what to do. Then an idea occurs to her, and unsure, she suggests he go to her homeland. The protagonist turns toward her in surprise, looks at her in bewilderment, and says, puzzled, that he does not understand what she meant. Mercy flushes, puts her hands forward, and says she doesn't mean anything like that, and the girl tells him she is only offering a change of scenery, while her ears droop and her tail stands on end from her owner's emotions. Isagi frowns slightly, puts his hand to his chin, and thinks over her suggestion to visit her homeland for a change of scenery. The protagonist says that, as he remembers her homeland, is the Beast Kingdom. He imagines a map of the Remuris Empire and the Beast Kingdom, where 80% of the people are Beastmen. The girl confirms this and says it is just a village on the outskirts. Hisagi says he is glad she invited him, but with an uncertain look, he wonders if he will be useful. Mercius suddenly moves closer and replies confidently, answering his concern without hesitation. Crossing her arms over her chest and frowning slightly, she says in a serious voice that having an alchemist like him with them would make things a lot better. He looks at her, surprised and impressed, and calls her by name. Although the village has plenty of natural resources, Mercius says the food situation gets worse every year, and she remembers the forests, mountains, and animals of her homeland. He says when she first offered to help his research, her goal was to make life easier for everyone by developing crops that could grow in poor soil. Remembering his promise to send the seeds to Mercia as soon as he finished working on them, he looks thoughtfully at the bag lying on the table beside him. Hisagi realizes he only just finished working on this culture and gathered a lot of data. Cupping his hands around his mouth, the protagonist considers it with a focused expression. The girl looks at him in bewilderment. The boy touches his chin and frowns as he thinks about how to make it grow easily on any plot of land. Suddenly, the protagonist says he understands. Mercia looks at him, surprised. The man grabs a bag from the table, turns sharply to the girl beside him, meets her gaze with a confident frown, and tells her he will go to her homeland. The main character spreads his arms into the light and looks at the girl with determined eyes, saying they might be able to use the cultures they have developed. Smiling, he tells her that if they can secure abundant food, they can spread their success around the world. She steps closer, returns the same smile, and thanks him sincerely. After a moment, her smile fades and she falls silent with anxiety, then asks him if he is really sure about it. The protagonist looks at her, puzzled and not understanding what she means. Clasping her hand in confusion, the girl covers her mouth. Looking away, she says she thinks that with his abilities and what he brought, he could be useful in any country. He looks at her in bewilderment and reminds her she invited him herself. Blushing slightly, she apologizes to him for her recent proposal, covers her mouth with her hand, and admits she made it in a moment of excitement. He says it's better to accept a neighbor's help than to be tied down and unable to act. Reaching out, he offers his hand to her. He believes that by acting freely, they can change the empire. Smiling, the protagonist places his right hand over his chest. Isagi tells her she helped him not only in his research, but also by always supporting him, so he wants to help her in return. He asks whether he cannot do it. Small drops of tears fill Mercy's eyes, and she wipes them away with her left hand. The protagonist says that in that case he will pack his things and go to the animal kingdom. The girl agrees with a smile. Blushing slightly, she says she'll quit and come too, and he smiles, pulls out his big bag, starts packing, and agrees they will meet later. As the girl moves to leave, humming softly under her breath, the young man suddenly understands her words and freezes, staring at her in confusion. Isagi suddenly rushes out of his workshop, shouts to the girl and asks her to wait, and the girl, already on the city street, turns at his voice and looks puzzled. The protagonist does not believe she will quit and go with him, and Mercia agrees, saying she cannot leave him alone. The protagonist asks, concerned, if she's sure she wants to quit her job. He thinks the palace job is prestigious and pays well. She smiles at him. She blushes slightly and rests her palm on her chin. Mercia smiles kindly, eyes half closed, and says that now he worries about her as she recently worried about him. Relieved, the protagonist meets her gaze and offers mercy by saying they should go together, and the girl accepts without hesitation. A few days later, the heroes are about to leave the city, passing through the gates as a carriage and its coachman pass by, and the girl tells him to leave quietly and asks if he needs anything else, and Isagi agrees with her. Smiling slightly, the main character looks ahead and says calmly that he put both water and food in the magic bag, so there will be no problems. Holding the straps of a huge backpack behind her, she frowns at a backpack-shaped magical creation made through alchemy. It can hold more than it appears. Mercia tells him it will take about a month to reach the Beast Kingdom. They face a long, difficult journey, but she urges them to enjoy it. The man stares sadly at the castle beyond the walls and agrees. Isagi smiles as she looks out the round window at the passing scenery, her mouth slightly open in surprise, and the girl beside her smiles too, looking the same way, while two men ride beside them and one holds a book he is reading. The scenes occur on September 12 and September 17. They walk through the city. The main character looks at the girl and uses his index finger to gesture her forward toward a large tower in front of them. On September 28th, they make camp in the countryside and light a small fire beside it. Mercia sits by burning sticks surrounded by stones, and the Asagi hand her a glass of steaming hot liquid. On October 7th, they are riding in a carriage on the road again. Marcia calls for the boy to wake, and he reluctantly opens his eyes when he sees his friend's silhouette in the darkness. The girl tells the protagonist they've arrived as Asaki rubs her eyes with her left hand and stares sleepily at the landscape outside the window. Startled, the protagonist opens his eyes and says this is Mercia's homeland. He takes in the crowded streets filled with beastmen. This is the kingdom of beasts, the village of Plumina. Dropped off, the protagonist is stunned by the sheer number of beastmen and looks around the streets in confusion. Even on the outskirts, this is still the kingdom of beasts. Isagi and Mercia watch the beastmen. They see a smiling, muscular bullman carrying a bucket of water in his left hand and holding a pole with more buckets on his right shoulder. Behind him, a determined girl tugs on a rope wrapped around a goat's neck to move it. A short distance away, a woman examines a merchant's shovel. A man with rabbit ears holds a cage with a rooster and looks surprised to see them, and beside him a girl tries to catch a chicken. Mercia urges him to go to her house. The boy objects and asks whether they should greet the headman first. He wonders whether he should be surprised by the man's sudden arrival. The girl tells him not to worry because the headman is her father, looks at him seriously and places her right hand over her heart, and the protagonist, surprised, asks loudly. He tells her she should have told him earlier. Mercia smiles, closes her eyes, and apologizes, saying she wanted to surprise him so she stayed quiet. The boy asks what he should do and says he is nervous now. Isagi worries he will tell them that he does not need any alchemists, and the girl calms him, saying everything is fine. Mercia looks serious, clenches her fist, and says that if he says that, she'll hit him to teach him a lesson, and the protagonist behind her is confused and thinks she just threatened to hit him. Waving toward her house, the girl calls Isagi to come over, and he follows her until they reach a large house where she says they are there and that it is her house. Mercy pauses at the door and tells him she'll talk to her parents first. He agrees and says he understands. She touches the door handle. A smiling woman suddenly steps out. Happy Mercy has returned. The girl calls her mom and asks her not to jump out because she was scared, and a man watches in surprise. Hisagi is shocked when he steps into Mercy's house. A furious man stands before him, glaring with a hostile expression. He realizes this is Mercy's father and feels the man's hostility. The man gestures to the bench, invites him to sit opposite, and asks his wife to sit next to Mercia. Isagi thanks him politely and apologizes sincerely for disturbing him. The protagonist hesitantly stammers that he is glad to meet them, explains he came from the Remuris Empire, and introduces himself as the alchemist Isagi. Mercy's father suddenly cuts him off and orders him to be quiet. The boy flinches and stares at him in surprise. The father snaps that he will not give his daughter to a man of questionable background. The protagonist arrives confused and asks for clarification, not understanding what's being said, and the village elder angrily shouts at him again, saying Mercia is his precious daughter and the protagonist is just someone who showed up. Mercy's mother interrupts him with a smile and says she likes him quite well. Her husband stops shouting and looks at his wife in bewilderment. Embarrassed by the situation, the protagonist asks for their forgiveness. Mercy's mother says Mercy has finally brought a man into the house. The woman assumes Mercy must have already decided everything. Suddenly, Mercia jumps up from her seat, surprising everyone with her behavior. Blushing and clutching the hem of her dress, she shouts that everything is wrong and that she wanted to introduce Isagi as a new resident of their village. Her father is taken aback as he stares at his trembling daughter and the man beside her, while the man's wife gives them an awkward smile. The man blushes slightly, asks to start again, and introduces himself as Kelsey, the head of this village. The elder asks if he wants to move to their village, and Isagi smiles and agrees, saying he would like permission to continue his alchemist work there. Mercy's parents fall silent, not understanding what he said. His father's mouth opens slightly and his mother frowns. The boy looks at them with concern, still not sure what happened. Mercia looks at Isagi and assumes her father and mother do not know what alchemy is. The boy looks at her in surprise, and the man scratches his head and admits, embarrassed, that it is true. Isagi now understands everything and asks whether they have ever met alchemists. The grill explains that alchemists are rare in these parts. the main character decides to explain who alchemists are first. Smiling, he tells them that alchemists use magic to control matter and to process materials, changing their structure. He believes it's hard to make something that differs much in quality from the original material, but it is a very practical art. The girl's parents frown and fall silent as they consider his words. Finding it too complicated for them to understand, the girl says it would be faster to demonstrate alchemy in practice, and the guy looks at her and agrees. The protagonist walks up to Kelsey and asks to borrow the sword at Kelsey's belt. Kelsey looks at his weapon and agrees. The protagonist inspects Kelsey's weapon closely. Kelsey asks for his opinion and says it's a fine piece of manatee he bought the other day, but the other man says there is no manatee in that dagger and reacts angrily as he asks again. The protagonist explains that alchemists can see the true nature of materials. The metal is low-grade, similar to manatite or gnometite. Inside her head, a girl imagines a merchant who sells counterfeit weapons and falsely claims they have magical power. The man becomes very upset and says it costs 20 silver coins. Removing his gloves while still holding the sword, he says confidently that everything is fine and he can remake it into a dagger from real manatite. Mercy's mother asks him again, surprised and thoughtful, while Mercy's father, amazed that he could turn the sword into a precious material, asks how he would do it. Grasping the sword in his hands, the protagonist watches a magic circle form around it as the blade begins to glow, and the girl's parents stare in amazement. First, he decides to change the dagger's shape and weight and concentrates on altering its structure by performing many different magical manipulations. Smiling sincerely, the main character gives his friend's parents the dagger he enchanted and says everything is ready. The man takes the weapon, looks at the other with surprise, and asks whether the dagger is real manatite, so Isagi tells him to channel a stream of magical power through it to check, and the man grows even more surprised. Kelsey channels a stream of magic into the new weapon, her mouth falling open and eyes widening in surprise, while the man stares at the dagger, equally astonished. Spotting a target on the wall behind the main character, he uses all his strength to throw his new weapon in one quick, deft motion at the target, saying he wants to test it. The dagger does its job, but to the village elder's shock, it rips the target apart and makes a hole in the wall, and the man looks out the window and sees the dagger stuck in the ground outside. Kelsey blushes slightly and smiles, saying it's cool. Behind him, his wife puts her left hand on his shoulder and with a forced smile asks what he is doing. The man turns to his wife, clearly afraid, and mumbles that he didn't think he was that powerful, while she gives off a menacing aura, cracks her fists, tells him not to make excuses, and Kelsey asks her for forgiveness. Horrified and a little confused, the protagonist apologizes to them and admits he should have warned them first. The man won't be able to fix something like that quickly. Isagi pulls a piece of wood from behind his backpack. After a while, the wall is fully intact again, like a target hanging in place. She says it's cool, and the main character thanks her. The guy uses magic to pull a piece of wood from the log. He says alchemists can do this and that his main goal is to use alchemy to farm. The man looks at him gravely and says the land is barren and farming would be pointless. Surprised, the protagonist says he already knew. Isagi says this explains why mountain and forest resources are declining, and the man, puzzled, asks why he came all the way here knowing that. Determined, the protagonist looks at the village chief, places his left hand on his chest, and says enthusiastically that he came here to improve the food situation using alchemy. Kelsey presses a hand to her chin, puzzled, and looks at him seriously. The boy says he heard from Mercia about the village's situation and wants to make farming possible on the poor soil by using crop varieties improved through alchemy. Isagi says he also wants to reduce the number of starving people, even by one, choosing his words carefully. Suddenly, the girl stands up. Mercia says that if things are left as they are, the wealth of the mountains and forests will only decline. With a determined look, the girl faces her parents and loudly asks them to let her take up farming using Lord Isaga's alchemy for the village's future. Kelsey closes her eyes and smiles softly. The man says he does not truly believe it, but he assumes he has a chance. The village elder looks at his smiling wife and says he will grant the man permission. Caught off guard, the protagonist stands stunned and confused, mouth wide open in shock, as Mercia smiles gratefully beside him, and they both sincerely thank Mercia's parents. Watching his wife write on a scroll, the man says Isagi needs his own house. They will give him a spacious house, and the woman hands the scroll to her daughter. She tells Mercier to take his Segi to a free house. The girl says she understands and accepts the scroll. Turning to the man, she smiles and gestures for him to come with her. At the palace he felt constrained, but here he can do as he likes, fully absorbed in his favorite work. Mercia and Isagi walk down the street while a girl watches them from around the corner. The girl recognizes them. The main character and the girl beside him walk past the edge of the village toward the forest. He believes he can use alchemy to make life in the village beautiful. Walking along a forest path, the girl says his home is here, and as they move through the trees, the man feels his new life is starting here, and he looks toward his new home with anticipation in his eyes. A small, old house stands before the girl and boy, its roof partly missing. They look at the building with incomprehension in their eyes. Mercia holds the paper, opens her mouth in surprise, and frowns as she looks at the building ahead, while Sagi looks confused and asks if this is his new home. Calling it a shabby, dilapidated house, the girl gives off a sinister air as she clutches a piece of paper in anger at his plan to force Mr. Asagi to live there. Behind her, the protagonist stares at the girl in bewilderment, a little afraid, then remembers the man's warning that the house is a bit old and says Kelsey warned him. Mercia spins and yells that she can't allow this. Her fists clench with anger as she wants to go and tell him everything. Isagi holds both hands out in a calming gesture and says that everything is fine. Turning to the young man, the girl expresses her disagreement with a determined gaze, slightly furrowed brows, and a small blush. Isagi makes a fist with his left hand and says that if a house is not fit to live in, it's better to rebuild it, telling her this is exactly how an alchemist thinks. Smiling, the guy says he has always wanted to try building a dream house, and the girl asks him again about the dream house with surprise in her voice. As a court alchemist, the main character was treated poorly for coming from an orphanage, and he thinks that's why he lived in a studio that looked like a large warehouse. Smiling, the main character looks at the house and says he will try to build something he likes. The girl lowers her hands and, with a little sadness in her voice, agrees with him. Pressing his gloved palm to the house's wood, he doubts it cannot be used just because it is so dilapidated, and the girl watches him closely. Taking off his gloves, he intends to tear down the house first, staring at the rundown building with a determined smile and a slight frown, then doggedly directs a stream of magic. A magic circle forms around his palm, allowing him to influence the tree. He alters the wood's structure, and moments later it begins to crack and shake in different directions. Finally, the building collapses, leaving only a tangle of sticks as the girl behind him watches, while he wipes his forehead from fatigue and smiles, her face showing bewilderment. Grabbing two boards, Mercia slings them over her shoulder and holds them with one hand. She smiles at him and says she will set the scattered boards aside. Surprised, the boy thanks her, then to himself, a little puzzled, thinks the boards must be quite heavy. He crouches and rummages through his bag. Determined to prepare the plot, the protagonist says he will clear the weeds, feels something in his bag, and pulls out a hybrid herbicide. Isagi used alchemy to change the product's composition, making it much stronger and faster acting, and now begins spraying it on the grass in his plot. With enthusiasm in his voice, the main character says everything is fine and encourages both himself and the girl to start building the house. Mercia looks at him and wipes her face with her left hand from fatigue. Pulling a large wooden stick from his magic backpack, the protagonist studies it with a slight frown, and the girl beside him pulls another stick from his backpack. Calling his name in alarm, she watches him with worry as Isagi collapses under the stick's weight, crying out in surprise. They pull out the ant Woody managed to get from the plant monster. Touching the tree, the protagonist activates his alchemy, and a magic circle appears around his hand, increasing the tree's durability. Isagi uses levitation magic to lift many sticks into the air. He guides pieces of wood with his hands while focusing his gaze. Using those sticks of wood, he starts building the foundation of his new dream house. Beside him, the girl watches with wide, surprised eyes. Her mouth is slightly open in shock. He thinks no one is limiting him anymore. With a steady gaze and a furrowed brow, he continues building his dream home with magic, putting up the walls and windows and beginning the roof. An ideal building plan sits in his head, and he happily brings it to life, having already built the doors, only needing to carry out the plan and finally completing the house by laying the roof. With joy in his voice, Isagi says everything is ready, spreads his arms wide as he looks at his beautiful new house, and his girlfriend standing nearby watches it too. Shielding his eyes with his right hand, the protagonist studies the building ahead and lets his left hand rest at his side, while the girl folds her arms across her chest and, admiration in her eyes, says it is excellent. They take off their shoes and step into the main character's new building. The man, a little shy, asks her if you overdid it. The woman covers her mouth in surprise and admiration and blushes a little. Mercy turns to him and smiles, saying she now understands what his dream house looks like. She touches the kitchen tables as the protagonist watches her happily. He leads her up the stairs to the second floor. She watches in surprise. They even find a bathroom in his new house. The protagonist says he will probably set up a proper workspace gradually later. Isagi asks the girl to help him arrange his furniture around the house. Mercia smiles, closes her eyes, and asks him to rely on her. The protagonist pulls one chair from his bag, disappointed, and realizes this is all they brought, sighs a little, sets the chair by the table, and says that if you look at it that way, it's as if they didn't bring any furniture at all. Smiling, the girl says nothing can be done because the warehouse had no room. The disappointed man remembers his old workplace piled with papers and agrees. Mercy's ear twitches when someone calls and asks if she's there, and she rushes out of the house to find the caller is her mother. The woman looks ahead, surprised, covers her open mouth with her hand, then turns to her daughter and asks whether there had ever been such a wonderful house in their village. Mercia tells her that he was soggy when he remade it with alchemy to make it more comfortable to live in. Her mother is surprised to hear he remade the house and says that alchemy is really cool. A little embarrassed, the protagonist scratches his head with his right hand and pushes it back. He apologizes that I will change everything here at my own discretion. The woman reaches forward in a conciliatory gesture and smiles, saying that everything is fine. Apologizing to him for arriving so suddenly, she stands in the doorway and offers to help clean so he can move in right away, then realizes with embarrassment that there is no need. He tells her he appreciates her concern. Smiling, she asks to see the inside of the house. Smiling back, he agrees and invites her in. Surprised and delighted, the woman steps into the house the boy built some time ago. Mercy's mother runs her hand over the table, praises the house as stunning, and notes the spacious kitchen. The daughter watches calmly and the protagonist stays silent. He points to the kitchen shelf behind the girl and says it is too high for her, and she turns to him in surprise. Mercia rises onto her tiptoes. With a focused look, she reaches up with her right hand toward the shelf. She says confidently she will reach it if she stretches. The man behind her looks confused and says he'll make her shorter, then starts using alchemy as a magic circle appears around his hand, while the girl reaches out and grabs the door handle. The woman asks if it is beautiful and says that putting all the utensils out would make this kitchen even more beautiful than theirs. The girls next to her come up with an idea. Sagi, not far away, looks embarrassed, scratches her head and throws her hand back. Mercia suddenly speaks up, turns to her mother, clasps her hands pleadingly, and asks whether they have any furniture or household items they do not use and whether they can bring them here. Later, Mercia puts her hands on her hips and stands in the middle of the main character's furnished kitchen, saying it feels cozy now as the man opens his mouth in surprise. The main character's eyes light up as he says that's cool and thanks her because it feels more like home, and the girl looks away and says quietly that she is glad. Marcia looks around the room and says the walls still seem empty and need something hung, and she also wants a vase on the table. Surprise and bewilderment show in his eyes as she tilts her head slightly, closes her eyes with a smile, and invites him to dinner for now. The girl brings out a large cauldron and sets it on the table over a napkin. Mercia tells him their mother gave them a tasty dish, so they can eat now. The young man remembers her. Smiling, the girl opens the cauldron lid, and the main character stares at the dish with eyes wide and mouth open in surprise, then admires it and says it looks delicious. The man realizes it's milk soup and finds it wonderful. The girl apologizes to him for the modest dish. Isagi calms her, smiling, and says she wanted something like that. The girl thanks him. Mercier pours a single portion. On the tray on the table is a special sienna soup, milky with mountain herbs and mushrooms, and beside it the bread from the magic bag. Smiling, the protagonist lifts a spoon to begin eating the milk soup as the girl stands behind him and wishes him a pleasant appetite, and Isagi turns to her in bewilderment. Isagi turns to the girl and asks with concern if she will eat with him. Mercia blushes deeply at his words, and her tail begins to smoke. The girl turns away and shouts that she's a servant and can't eat at the same table as him. The man looks at her in bewilderment and tells her they're no longer in the castle and no one will scold her. Surprised, the girl looks at him with wide eyes and asks whether she can join in. The main character turns to her and invites her to eat with them. Clasping her hands at her sides, the girl tilts her head, blushes, smiles, and thanks him for letting her join him. Mercier and Isagi sit at a set table with milk soup and bread on it, and the protagonist smiles and laughs as he says she is sitting opposite him in an unusual way. Covered in paint, the girl tells him she feels the same and cannot calm down for some reason unless he's there, and the man says that's not surprising and encourages her to try to suppress the feeling. You thank her again for the food, and she accepts. The protagonist raises the spoon to his mouth, blows on the milk soup to cool it slightly, then puts the spoon in his mouth. Isaga's eyes widen in amazement as she says it's delicious, and he says the milk's sweetness comes through in the mouth. He asks Mercio what the plant on his spoon is called. Mercio says it is crickcook grass, a wild plant that often grows in the nearby forests, and the girl says she finds it very tasty. The protagonist finds the stem crisp and the boiled leaves soft, and imagines the grass is probably tasty both boiled and fried. He notices the mushroom's flavor and the bacon's saltiness blending perfectly with the milk's gentle sweetness, and he feels each ingredient as he imagines it. The man bites a piece of bread with pleasure and dips it into the milk soup, thinking how the bread has soaked up all the soup and become soft and easy to eat. She watches the cheerful man gobble his lunch and smiles with relief. Then the main character says he's full and leaves an empty plate behind him. The girl says she is glad he liked it, gathers all the dishes from the table onto a single tray and carries them away, and Mercia, smiling, says she will wash the dishes herself. He tells her it's unnecessary and that he'll clean everything himself, believing it's better for her to return home after so long away. Holding a dirty dish under her nose, she says seriously that she will stay, and the man looks at her, surprised and amazed by her words, asking whether she wants to stay here for the night. The girl says she will live here and serve him, places her hands on the table and meets his gaze, and the protagonist is taken aback and blushes. Excited, he asks her to wait and holds his hands out in a conciliatory gesture, asking if she understands this is not the imperial palace and that he is no longer a court alchemist, and she agrees. Mercy crosses her arms over her chest and says confidently that she is ready to serve him as long as his heart desires. Her answer is final. The protagonist opens his mouth in surprise and looks at her in amazement. Isagi frantically searches for words to convince her and hesitantly says he needs to prepare a bedroom for her but can't build it now. She says her things are already in an empty room on the second floor. Pointing with her hands, she indicates the items already in the room. The main character says she works quickly, as always. Still, he keeps hesitantly trying to love his girlfriend. Mercia looks at him sadly and asks whether she can do it. The man resigns himself and exhales wearily. He says he'll be glad and that her help will be useful. The girl smiles and with delight in her voice asks if that is true. Isagi frowns slightly and suggests she tell her parents because they will worry, especially Kelsey. The protagonist remembers the evil village chief shouting he would not allow it. The girl is at a loss. She trembles slightly and says hesitantly that her mother gave her permission, and the man looks confused, asks about her mother again, and then understands what she means. Close to the main character's house in a village where night has already fallen, an enraged village elder shouts his daughter's name in a loud, furious voice. Clenching his left fist with force and fury, he demands that she return home, shouting that he will not allow her to live with Isagi, while the guy is embarrassed and the girl is perplexed. The next day, the girl gently knocks on the door of the main character's house, which she recently built with the help of alchemy. A worried man looks at the girl, says good morning using her name, and asks whether she discussed everything properly with Kelsey yesterday. The girl looks sad, clutches the hem of her dress, her ears down and silent. Regretfully, Mercier says she did not get her father's permission and will have to come in from home every morning to help him, and the protagonist understands. The girl asks him for forgiveness in a mournful voice. Isagi believes she is his precious daughter, and that feeling is natural. The alchemist remembers the village chief, furious and clenching his fist, demanding her return. Assuming they can talk properly, the young man looks at his dejected girlfriend and tells her that it is enough for him if she simply comes. Turning to him with a sad expression, she suddenly steps forward and insists she will persuade her father to let her live and work in the same house, puts a hand to her chest and asks for a little time, and her boldness surprises him. Isagi says she does not have to try so hard because it would be sad if she fought. He holds his hands out in a conciliatory gesture and, a little shy, thinks about how nervous he would be if they suddenly started living together. Mercia keeps trying to object to him. The man scratches his head and tosses his hand back in confusion. Another girl with ears watches the scene from behind the bushes. The girl calls Mercia by name. She turns around with a surprised look to see who called her name, while Isaki crouches and peeks from behind Mercia, also surprised by the stranger. A young, beautiful girl with cute ears appears before them. Reaching one hand out, she presses the other to her body and runs toward them. She is relieved that this is Mercy after all. Her mouth drops open and her eyes widen in surprise at an old acquaintance, and Mercier hesitantly says her name, calling the girl Nea. Running up, she grabs the other's hands and says she heard she had come back and came to meet her. Mercia smiles and says they have not seen each other for a long time. The protagonist, standing nearby, watches. Nea still holds Mercier's hands and asks her old friend why she returned so suddenly. Mercier tries to explain, but Nea spots the man and looks surprised. Nea frowns slightly, opens her mouth in surprise, and keeps looking at the young man who reaches out his hand, puzzled by her insistent stare. Then she has an idea and says she understands everything. Blushing slightly, the girl puts a finger to her chin and with a sly smile says she brought her husband, and Mercia blushes deeply and waves her hands in different directions to deny it. After a while, they explain everything to Nei, and the protagonist says his name is Isagi and that he is an alchemist. The girl repeats that he wants to use alchemy to make the village prosper and says it is cool. Nei closes his eyes and smiles, then says he seems like a good person. The girl greets him and offers her hand for a handshake. The guy looks surprised. The girl with the ears introduces herself as Nia, then closes one eye, smiles widely and blushes a little as she says she is Mercy, a childhood friend. Smiling, the girl grips the alchemist's hand and shakes it vigorously in several directions as a greeting. The man stands bewildered by her actions. Mercia watches with a look of displeasure. The protagonist stares at his new friend, mouth slightly open, surprised that she would be so hospitable to a human. Nea gives a confident look, presses against Mercia, and slightly covering her mouth with her hand, asks whether she invited him, while the girl blushes deeply and replies that she did and that there is nothing wrong with it. The man watches the confused Mercia and the embarrassed Nea, surprised. He had thought he and Mercia shared almost everything, but he is still taken aback. Her sudden change of expression shows they get along well. Watching the girls nearby with their backs turned to him, the guy wishes he had a close friend like that. Mercia feels very embarrassed by her friend's words. Nia runs away from them and says she must go, and the girl wishes that Isagi's farm will prosper, then waves her right hand to say goodbye, and Mercia returns the gesture, like Isagi, waving after her. Mercy nervously presses the hem of her dress, blushes slightly, and apologizes to the man, saying her friend is noisy, but the protagonist disagrees and says he is glad she spoke to them. After a while, he suggests to his girlfriend that they start work today. She fixes her hair and is surprised they are starting already. He explains he wants to check as soon as possible whether the harvest will come in here. The protagonist rests his hand on his chin, remembering that yesterday he cleared the weeds from this field while building the house, and now he must plow the land. The boy reacts in surprise and turns his head to look to the side. Isagi says a stone is blocking the way here. The protagonist wants to use it as material. The girl watches his actions silently. Isagi presses his palm to the boulder and studies its composition. A magic circle forms around his hand. With magic, he reshapes the stone until it resembles a human silhouette. Finally, a large stone golem appears before the boy and girl. The main character is pleased he succeeded, and Mercia looks at the new monster with surprise in her eyes. Isagi holds the magic stone, studies it, thinks about inserting the stone, the driving force, into his chest, and then puts it in place. The protagonist squeezes his hand in joy and announces the golem is ready. The golem's eyes glow with bright light. Isagi turns to it and orders it to move forward. It follows his command and takes a step. Mercia watches in surprise. The protagonist orders the stone golem to plow the earth, and to make sure it hears him, he cups his hands around his mouth to amplify his voice. The golem obeys and plows the earth with two hoes. Shielding his eyes from the sun, Misagi presses a hand to his brow to get a better look at his invention and says the magic's behavior and flow are fine, pleased with it, while the smiling girl beside him notes that this is expected from the golem he created. She says she will spray herbicide across a wide area. From behind the nearby bushes, the village chief's voice calls out. He loudly calls the young man by name and asks what it is. Mercia frowns slightly when she recognizes her father's voice. Still angry, she doesn't even turn to look at him, and the main character watches the village head, who, amazed to see what looked like a golem, unexpectedly calls him by name. Isagi tells him the golem was created by alchemy to help in the field. He assures him it will not attack people and tells him not to worry. The man crosses his arms and stammers a little. Kelsey is unsure but says that alchemy is useful. The man rubs his chin thoughtfully and asks the boy whether the land can grow crops. The boy looks at him in surprise. Behind them, the golem keeps plowing the land. The protagonist smiles and says the soil here is not much different from the Empire's, so he thinks everything will grow without problems. Isagi holds the seeds in his hands and says that this is only a guess. A slight frown crosses the man's face as he looks away from the protagonist in confusion and says that if it's true, that's just wonderful, while his daughter sprays herbicide on the plants behind him. He thinks about Mercia and is embarrassed to realize that because she ignores Kelsey, she must be angry. The girl keeps doing her thing, refusing to pay attention to her father. The protagonist takes a bag from his bag, hesitates at the tense atmosphere, says he will start growing plants now, and invites the village chief to come and take a look if he wants. Smiling, the main character says that if everything goes as planned, it will be possible to harvest right away. He's holding a huge bag, while the Beastmen village elder looks at him questioningly. I don't understand what he's talking about. He keeps telling himself he can harvest right away and feels unsure. Opening the bag, the man begins to scatter its contents and says he will first spread special fertilizers made by alchemy. The protagonist explains the raw material is a fertilizer commonly used throughout the empire, but instead of altering or enhancing it, he personally made it more nutritious. The man looks at him, surprised and bewildered. The girl realizes her father understands nothing and stays silent. Mercier relents and explains to Kelsey that simply put it's a fertilizer made by an alchemical process to strengthen depleted soil. Mercier looks at her in surprise. Perplexed, the man says he understands. The protagonist breathes a sigh of relief as he watches the father and daughter. The girl apologizes to Asagi for making him worry. The guy looks at her kindly. Smiling, he says he thinks they have an issue with each other, but they get along because family is irreplaceable. Mercia looks at her father and nods, agreeing with the man. He returns her smile. Shifting the subject, the boy turns to them and asks them to scatter the fertilizer. The golem has already finished the job and stands not far from him. The girl standing next to her father agrees with the main character. They start working. The girl pours out the bag while the golem beside her hoes, and the protagonist says the golem will mix the scattered fertilizer with a hoe and form beds with a shovel. The boy also says they will plant seeds where the soil is prepared. The village chief addresses a soggy person by name and asks if he needs to wait before mixing the soil with fertilizer. The protagonist explains this is usually the case, but his fertilizer speeds up decomposition, saving time and making thorough mixing unnecessary, and the man is very surprised by what he said. With her eyes closed and a calm expression, the girl says it's a piece of cake for Mr. Asagi. The man behind her gives an uncertain smile, and Asagi reaches into his backpack, thinking the bar has been raised. He takes a bag from his backpack and says they will first plant crops that grow easily even in the wasteland and are familiar to everyone, and when he opens the bag it contains selectively bred potatoes. The man leans over the beds he has made and carefully places seed potatoes into the holes, saying he then covers them with soil using a hoe. The boy picks up a bucket of water and says confidently that if he waters it, it will grow and should be ready to harvest. Isagi quickly dumps the water into the holes, and the girl behind him does the same. The man holds his ground and, his voice unsure, tells the boy he cannot grow up right away. The boy looks at the village chief in surprise. He says potatoes grow quickly, of course, but they still need 3 or 4 months, and suddenly plants start appearing under his feet in the holes, so he looks down in amazement and sees how fast the plants grow. Soon the whole field is covered with ripe potatoes. The man looks stunned, eyes wide and mouth open. The girl beside him smiles as she watches their work. The potatoes are fully ripe and ready for harvest. The protagonist holds an empty bucket and looks at the scene with satisfaction, quietly rejoicing. The man standing behind him is shocked and cannot regain his composure. The man turns to him and says that since the stems and leaves have yellowed, it's time to harvest, and Kelsey still stares at him in disbelief, amazed by his words. The protagonist grabs a bush and pulls it up with effort, frowns slightly, and asks how that's possible, while Mercia and her father look at the man with hope and wait for him to pull the bush up. At last the main character succeeds, and with extra effort pulls the bush and the potato out of the ground. Isagi smiles in the light and looks at the positive result. In a joyful voice he says it's a success, holding a vegetable in one hand and resting his other hand at his side, and he adds that he was confident but still feels relieved, while Mercia is happy too and congratulates him. Holding another uprooted potato plant, he shouts that he can't believe it's possible to harvest potatoes the same day. The other man looks at him. He says his surprise is justified and suggests trying it. The girl suggests a simple saute, and Isagi says since the weather is nice they can cook it outside. A while later they set the table. The girl peels and cuts the potatoes with a knife, and the man and the young man behind her sit at the table, while the latter again takes something from his backpack. Seeing a strange device with a magic circle on top, the village chief asks Izzy what it is. Izzy says it's a magic device that generates fire. Kelsey repeats his words, surprised. He reaches for the round switch on the side of the device and turns it. A small light appears on the magic circle as he explains that pressing the button this way will light a fire. The man watches in amazement, mouth wide, as the fire appears out of nowhere. He calmly continues, explaining that adjusting the lever lets you change the fire's strength. The man, shocked and with furrowed brows, says he heard the city has many conveniences, but a device that can so easily start a fire is hard to believe as he spreads his arms wide and looks at the device on the table. The protagonist watches his great surprise calmly. The village elder asks whether the young man did it himself and calls him Isagi. The fire keeps burning. Smiling, the boy narrows his eyes a little and tells the village chief that an alchemist made these magical utensils, and the man remains amazed and looks at him in surprise. The girl puts potatoes in a frying pan, raises the heat, and decides to add vegetable oil and fry them over medium heat. When the crust turns golden, she plans to flip it again. Mercia smiles as she turns the potatoes, tossing them into the air a couple of times while holding the pan handle. The girl covers the frying pan with a lid, and the protagonist and her father stand beside her watching, already impatient for the dish, while Kelsey holds cutlery and Isagi holds an empty plate. The girl closes her eyes and, smiling, looks at them. Mercia considers letting it brew for about 4 minutes on low heat, then she sets out the portions. Holding a tray of ready food, the girl says with joy and a smile that everything is ready, and she has finished cooking the potato sauté, which is already on the set table. His mouth waters as he looks at the dish. A small tear falls as he imagines his daughter made it. The girl says it's seasoned with oil, salt, and pepper, and leaves the rest to them. He lifts a piece of potato to his mouth, chews it thoroughly, and his eyes widen in surprise. The girl chooses the same dish and blushes a little. The main character smiles and says it is delicious. The man continues to chew the sautéed potatoes thoroughly. Sitting opposite him, the girl says there are no questions about the taste. The village head looks at the finished dish in surprise and, amazed by the potato's flavor, says it is much better than what they grow in the village. Strangely, the man says he feels full of energy. He clenches his left fist with enthusiasm. The other man watches in bewilderment and thinks the Beastman's perception has sharpened. The calm protagonist says the potato has been improved and eating it increases vitality, and the man is surprised it can do that. Isaki's words make little difference, and the man keeps eating the tasty dish until his plate is empty, while Mercy picks up the dirty dishes and takes them away, leaving the man and the boy outside. Kelsey touches her chin and asks the man if the plants he perfected with alchemy can even grow in this village, and he replies that they can. With an inspired look and a confident voice, the main character puts his hand to his chest and says he will do it so they can, even if they can't, because it's his job, and the man looks at him in surprise but remains silent. Isagi says he will expand his fields and plant improved varieties so he can harvest a wider range of crops and ensure a steady supply. Kelsey smiles calmly and thinks he can make these lands fertile because he has the power to do so. The man speaks loudly in agreement, puts a hand to his side, and says he trusts him with this matter. The man thanks him loudly and sincerely and says he will do it gradually. The next day he sowed other fields and planted tomatoes and carrots. The area around his house is planted with many different plants. The number of fields has grown a lot. A boy and a girl stand beside a golem. Isagi, a little embarrassed, says it feels awkward and asks Mercia whether he overdid it. Mercia confirms he did. Shielding his eyes from the scorching sun with his hand, the protagonist looks into the distance and thinks about how he used to have to grow plants across a huge area of the palace. Knowing he had so much space, he got so excited he overdid it. Isagi, looking tired, pulls out another potato bush and breathes hard, trying to catch his breath. Mercia and the golem behind him help him. Wiping under the pole with his right hand, the protagonist sighs, unsure what to do with all of it, and decides to keep it in a magic bag. The girl approaches him with a puzzled look, carrying a large bag of harvest, and Isagi says they are short-handed and won't be able to gather even half of it by the end of the harvest season. Mercia asks if he can make another golem, and the young man smiles shyly and says he cannot because he no longer has the magic stones. Suddenly, the young girl puts her hand to her chest and eagerly suggests asking her parents for help, and Mercia is sure they will. Here, the protagonist is asked to wait a moment. The girl agrees and says they'll work with the golem for now. One hand rests on his side while the other reaches up. He grimaces and complains about his lower back. A girl's confused voice calls from somewhere asking what it is. He turns toward it, sees Ni, gives the amazed girl a soggy look and wishes her a good morning. Her eyes widen in surprise, and she covers her mouth with both hands, saying their village had never had a field this big. Removing his hat, the protagonist says that yesterday they cultivated using alchemy. Surprised, the girl says only 2 days have passed since he arrived, adding in a doubtful voice that it is strange anything can grow in this soil and that the harvest time has come. Smiling, the main character says it's all thanks to alchemy. Angered, the girl closes her eyes in rage and squints hard, then shouts that he has the same answer for everything. A voice from the side suddenly says that Isagi is telling the truth and calls the girl by name, and the boy looks at the newcomers in bewilderment before turning around and being surprised to see Uncle Kelsey. A man with a hoe on his shoulder says confidently he saw it with his own eyes yesterday. The crops Isagi modified grow even in this village. Beside him stand his smiling wife holding a basket and his daughter. A delighted light fills Ni's eyes as she blushes slightly, clenches her fists, smiles with admiration, and says that if Uncle says so then it must be true, and she thinks that's cool. Turning to the main character with the same enthusiastic smile, she assumes they are now harvesting. Slightly embarrassed by her overly violent reaction, the protagonist confirms her words and with a modest smile admits he went a bit overboard with the sowing. Surprised that so much has grown, the man says he did not expect the field to grow so much in one day. Asagi scratches his head, throws his head back, and apologizes sincerely, saying he overdid it in his joy. Kelsey says it's wonderful that their food-starved village is seeing such abundant crops. The village elders smile and tell him not to worry. His wife smiles at him and says their village is enjoying such a rich harvest for the first time. She adds that she feels a little excited. Naya beside them says she will help with the harvest. The man looks at his new friends with joy. They urge him to begin harvesting. Mercia and her mother pick pumpkins and squashes, smiling. Kelsey cuts a cabbage with a knife. The stone golem and the weary protagonist pick beets. Eventually, many baskets of different vegetables and fruits, including eggplants and mother-in-law, stand side by side, and Usagi wipes her forehead and exhales wearily. Suddenly, Naya emerges from the nearby bushes and calls him by name. She holds a tomato in her left hand and points at it with the index finger of her other hand. Smiling, the girl asks if she can try it. The protagonist returns the same smile and says she can certainly try, and the girl, delighted by his answer, exclaims loudly and enthusiastically. Visibly delighted, the girl with ears brings the tomato to her mouth and takes a bite, then blushes and touches her cheek, squinting at the tomato's flavor. An enthusiastic girl asks the main character what it is and says it tastes very good. The guy is pleased by her reaction. Naya says it's very different from the tomatoes she knows. Iseji tells her these tomatoes grow faster and are sweeter. The girl, surprised and impressed, says it's cool, and Mercia watches them from behind the bushes with a displeased expression. Gloomy, the girl says it seems like they're having a lot of fun together. You pick up a tomato with one hand and look at her. The man holds a bitten tomato and looks at her in surprise. Mercia picks up another tomato and says with a calm expression that she will try it too. The protagonist agrees happily and without question. The girl bites into the vegetable happily. Naya steps forward and props her up. The girl covers her mouth in surprise at Naya's sudden kindness, and Mercia frowns while watching in bewilderment. Nile gives her friend a sly smile. Mercy's face flushes so red it looks like her head might start to steam. Mercy frowns at her friend's words and says her name in anger. The girl yells for her to wait and catches up to Naya, who runs away. She says she is angry. Isagi watches from the side, picks a tomato, and with a slight smile thinks the two get along well. 3 days later, NEA Mercia, the village chief and his wife stand with the protagonist in a field near his home, and Isagi says the harvest is over and thanks them sincerely for their help. Kelsey asks the boy what he will do with the harvest. The boy holds the bag, smiles, and says he will give it to the villagers because keeping it in the magic bag will clog it. Mercia's mother lifts her left index finger and suggests throwing a banquet. The protagonist looks surprised and asks her again about it. Smiling broadly, she suggests treating everyone to dishes made from your field's harvest, believing it will help people get to know you and make living together easier. Usagi hesitates because he thinks a banquet is a hassle with all the preparations. Touching his chin thoughtfully, he remembers the palace banquets where Mercy addressed him by name. She explains that although it's called a banquet, it's a relaxed event where you just invite people to the central square and set up chairs and tables, and he says he understands. The village chief shouts they'll call everyone and start preparing, announces a banquet for tonight, and the protagonist agrees enthusiastically at first, but then is surprised it's tonight. A while later, the man asks the woman if everything is ready and says they need to hurry to the central square, and he worries whether everything will go smoothly, but Mercia does not understand his concern. Asagi explains he is human and has only just arrived here. The man is very worried and hesitantly asks her if anyone will come to his banquet. The girl says that although the banquet is today, she expects everyone to be there. The protagonist looks at the square in surprise. Marcia turns to him and says everyone will come because such banquets haven't been held in a long time. Isagi watches in surprise at the large crowd behind the girl. Even small children frolic in the streets. He is amazed by how many people there are and smiles as he watches. Marcia is happy too. Mercy's mother calls from outside. She speaks to Sagi by name and says she wants to start cooking now and that he can help if he brings the ingredients. He agrees. He pulls a variety of vegetables from his magic bag onto the table, including eggplants, tomatoes, onions, pumpkins, and carrots, and the woman is surprised by how many there are. The village chief's wife says they haven't used this many fresh ingredients in a long time and is thinking about what to cook for them, while the protagonist happily watches the cheerful crowd. All the Beast race residents were busy getting ready for the festival, each handling their own tasks, and Mercia, Ni, and the others were preparing the ingredients for the dish. Once all the ingredients were prepared for cooking and placed directly into the cauldron, Isagi began applying his alchemy to the food. All the villagers of Paminia watched with nervous chatter, but soon the fire was lit and the food in the cauldron began to cook. Isagi smiled as the Beast race girls tended the cauldron, gradually adding ingredients while the food cooked, enjoying the process of cooking. With the dishes ready, the villagers went to the table for food, and Kelsey, Mercy's father, called out to Isagi while the village chief stood on the main stage. The man asked the boy to come onto the stage for a minute. Isagi agreed to the village chief's request. Kelsey addressed the villagers and thanked them for coming to the gathering, explaining that Asaga was the reason their food-poor village now had such an abundance of food. When Isagi heard the man's announcement, he immediately blushed in embarrassment. The sudden introduction to the whole village surprised him because he had not expected it. Isagi stood on stage, hesitant after the sudden introduction, but after a moment he decided to give a welcoming speech. Collecting himself briefly, Isagi introduced himself in a trembling voice, saying he was an alchemist who had only arrived in the village a few days earlier and knew little, and the villagers smiled warmly at his shy, nervous manner. The boy pointed out that plenty of ingredients remained and told them the villagers could eat as much as they wanted. Nair and Marcia smiled as Isagi performed on stage. After the boy's unexpected introduction, the village chief invited everyone to welcome the new resident Isagi and drink to his health, lifting a wooden mug as he spoke. The whole village lifted wooden mugs with broad smiles, welcomed the boy as a new villager with a loud cheer, then emptied their mugs as they celebrated the festival. Pulminia buzzed with activity. Most residents sat at festive tables with their families. Everyone was pleased to have such a large amount of delicious food after so long. Walking down the street lined with festive tables, the man awkwardly realized there were no free seats. Every table was taken as residents dug into delicious food and lively noise filled the village. A man in the distance was suddenly called out. It was Mercy, already seated at the festive table. The girl told Isagi there was another free seat beside her and Nia. As the boy approached their table, the girl said she had already set aside a portion for him. Isagi thanked Mercia for the food. His plate already held a dish called patafu with vegetables. Patafu is a thick, hearty soup of beef and vegetables. Isagi was delighted by the dish's appetizing appearance. He scooped a spoonful into his bowl of patafu. Admiring the food, Isagi made Marcia feel flattered and pleased Nea, then tried the patafu with vegetables and enjoyed the taste. Tasting the dish, he looked at his empty spoon with delight. Pat ofo with vegetables was truly delicious. The sweetness of the carrots and onions blended perfectly with the sharp black pepper. It was indescribably delicious. Isagi tasted the pleasant flavors of potatoes, mushrooms, sausages, and several other ingredients in the dish, while Mercia smiled watching the boy eat the potofai with vegetables, and Nea tasted the dish as well. Nea was delighted by the taste of the vegetable potofo, and she told everyone with admiration that she had not eaten such a rich vegetable soup for a long time, so she enjoyed the delicious dish. They were constantly scrimping on food, and often had to make do with vegetable peelings. Nea silently agreed with Mercia, yet was glad to see so much food on the table. A man of the beast race overheard their conversation. With a sad, hollow face, he said that one day the banquet would end, and they would have to return to their meager food, and the villagers who heard him were stunned by his grim words. No one at the banquet wanted to hear or consider the suggestion that the food might run out again, but one villager believed it was true, and Isagi watched all this in awkward shock. He realized nothing could be done about some people having those thoughts, so he couldn't blame the man for being worried. Meanwhile, the other residents treated the man a bit coldly. At that moment, food supplies in every house in the village had not increased. This news upset him and wiped the smile from his face. The boy then made a single decision. Speaking loudly to get everyone's attention, he tried to calm the worried villagers. In response, Isagi stood up from his seat. The boy then announced loudly to the villagers of Paminia that they too could grow the crops he had selectively bred. All the villagers stopped eating and listened to his words. The man explained their crops would still grow in the depleted soil because the plants resisted cold and disease, and the worried residents listened to his soggy speech in stunned silence. The silver-haired boy made a firm promise to the villagers that he would distribute seeds of these crops to everyone, and Hisagi met them with a confident expression. The boy's words surprised Nea, the brown-haired girl, who was stunned that she could even grow plants. Isaki agreed with the girl, and if Nea took good care of the seeds, she could grow nutritious plants with tasty fruit. The girl was delighted by the news. After the speaker's words, the villagers started whispering among themselves. The man who heard those words was deeply shocked. In disbelief, he said aloud that he thought he was dreaming, stunned by the boy's sudden offer to help increase the food supply of their village, Paminia. However, one villager worried because Asagi had only recently arrived in the village. He could not understand why the newcomer was doing so much for the villagers, so he asked Asagi directly. Mercia worried for Asagi after the man spoke offensively to him. The villager did not understand why a stranger like Asagi would do all this for them, and the boy remained calm after the man's rude question, showing no other emotion. Only his clenched fist showed his anger as he began to explain, and he told the man that as a baby he had been left in front of a church in the imperial capital, so the villager was shocked to learn he was an orphan. Isagi kept talking, telling how he fought for the meager crumbs he was given and lived in hunger, and the villagers of Puminia were stunned by his sad story. Ultimately, Isagi said this was why he knew what it was like to go without food, showing he had often been hungry and did not have tasty meals every day. Because of that, the boy smiled as he asked them, "Everyone wants to eat good food until they are full." He spoke about his sad childhood but did not feel sad about it. The man was stunned by the boy's sad story and by the fact that, despite everything, he still smiled so broadly at the world. His eyes widened as he looked at Asagi. He awkwardly apologized to Asagi for doubting him. The boy was not worried because if he were a villager, he would have the same doubts. Mercy smiled at the blond boy. The determined villager asked Asagi if he could easily share his seeds, and if Asagi had plenty on his dinner table, the villager wanted to ask for some to try growing his own food. A man raised his hand, and the rest of the villagers followed. After his request, others came to Isagi to get seeds and try farming. Overwhelmed by the crowd rushing for the seeds, Isagi calmed the Puminian villagers' excitement, though some panic lingered, assured them there were plenty of seeds for everyone, and Mercia watched with a warm smile. Even the strongest or most accomplished person can harden inside when they eat poorly and lose sight of why they live, and Isagi kept researching food after becoming an alchemist. The boy handed out the plant seeds he had developed. Villagers crowded into a long line for the seed bags. He knew that hunger made everyone equal. He did it so more people could fight hunger. Asagi wanted to further develop farming in this world. The boy looked confidently at the happy villagers who had received the bag of seeds. He spotted a familiar man among them, holding a huge bag of seeds. Isagi knew that if the villagers started farming sooner, the food situation in their village of Pulminia would improve greatly. Kelsey was busy distributing seeds to his villagers. Holding a bag of seeds, the man called out again to all the villagers of Pulminia in a loud voice, drawing everyone's attention. The man realized this was happening to make the village more prosperous. He rallied the villagers because it gave them hope for a better future. The villagers raised their mugs. Night had fallen and it was dark outside, with only bright lanterns lighting the village. The people of Pulminia were happy they could improve their quality of life, so that day they emptied their cups while humming happily. At the Ramirez Imperial Castle in the Ramirez Empire, the head alchemist was reading a report on the increased production of magic tools and items to his superior, who then called him Garius. The boy was a prince and first in line to the throne, named Waste Dreventure Remoris, and he planned to ask the man why there had been no report on Isagi this month, because the crown prince wanted to know what Isagi was doing. Chief alchemist Garius was stunned that his master Weiss remembered the impudent commoner. The man could not answer the prince's question for a moment, leaving an awkward silence in the room. He told Prince Weiss he had simply dismissed the commoner. The commoner had assumed he was only a dependent. The room went silent for a moment. The crown prince was stunned and asked why Isagi had been dismissed. The man arrogantly told the prince that alchemists in this empire made magical tools and military equipment. Isagi did none of that beyond the bare minimum. When the reason for Isagi's dismissal was explained, Crown Prince Weiss Ramirez immediately grew angry and called the man with long hair a fool. His slap on the table rang through the office. The man had caused them great harm. Garius was surprised the prince was so furious over firing the insolent commoner Isagi, since he didn't think that alchemist was particularly special. Prince Weiss told Garius angrily that they had hoped Isagi's crops would fix the empire's dire food shortage, so he had entrusted the effort to Isagi and raised the budget. Despite the prince's anger, Gary still said his side was useless in a trembling voice. The man could not believe that the low-ranking man's research was more valuable than creating magical weapons. Crown Prince Weiss's angry voice changed his mind. Prince Weiss Ramirez told the chief of alchemists in a furious tone that he saw nothing in his subordinates except status, and the crown prince thought Garius had no talent. The gray-haired man began trembling all over as he grasped the seriousness of the situation. The crown prince kept staring at the chief of all alchemists with a cold, angry look. Cold sweat soaked Garius's pale face, and the chief alchemist didn't know what to do next because the crown prince was angry about his actions. Prince Weiss, grim-faced and angry, ordered the white-haired man to immediately find an alternative way to increase food production. They needed more food, and then the crown prince paused. Garius broke out in a cold sweat at the crown prince's terrifying anger, waiting for his master's next words about another way to solve the problem. After a brief pause that further intimidated the man, Prince Weiss spoke loudly and angrily to the chief of the alchemists, and added another option that Garius should return Isagi to him while the boy handled agricultural matters. Morning light filled the yard. The gray-haired grandmother holding a hoe thanked Isagi because it was all his doing. She had never expected crops to grow in such poor soil, so the resident was pleased. Hearing their grandmother praise them for helping with the crops, Mercia and Isagi smiled and said together that her happiness mattered most to them. The girl and boy then said goodbye to the gray-haired grandmother. This happened because they distributed seeds of selectively bred crops to the villagers of Pomenia. In the village of Pomenia, an agricultural frenzy took hold. All the villagers were busy planting the seeds they had received from the boy, and everyone worked in the fields to grow crops and fruit. The beast race girl said that if things stayed calm, the village of Pomenia could reap a bountiful harvest, and Isagi agreed, but the boy felt puzzled. Isagi was very worried about something, and it left him deep in thought, and Mercia saw him like that and immediately became concerned, wanting to know what was puzzling him. The man explained that the fertilizer they were using was Isagi's improved version of the imperial formula. At this rate, it would be used up in a few years. Mercia looked at him, surprised. Isagi explained that this was why they needed a new fertilizer that could be produced in the village, and the girl kept looking at him in surprise. Isagi thought it over and realized they could buy imperial fertilizer from traveling merchants, but making fertilizer from the village's raw materials was still best because it cost less than buying from the merchants at a high price. The girl knew that if she kept getting fertilizer from Isagi's pocket, the problem would never go away. Hearing the black-haired girl's words, Isagi decided to first gather the fertilizers long used in the village of Pomenia and told Mercia decisively. Mercy, you will listen to the boy's final decision. She promised him she would ask the peasant family in the village of Pomenia if they knew about the fertilizer and ask them to share it with her. Later, the boy and girl were at home with only 3 kinds of village fertilizer on their table. Isagi told her it would not be enough for them. The only reason the fertilizer supply was so small was that the village soil was poor, so few people farmed. This was enough to form the foundation of the new Isagi fertilizer, but to improve it, you will need raw materials with slightly more of the village's inherent magical power. Mercia smiled and told the boy they should go into the forest to get the village's necessary raw materials with magical power. Isagi was slightly surprised by her suggestion. Mercy told him they could collect the needed natural materials in the forest because those resources grew only there. She pointed to the window, and a forest appeared before them. Isagi realized the raw materials were likely to be found there. Isagi decided to go with a confident smile. The man had planned to go to the forest alone to gather supplies for the village, but he suddenly fell silent. She suddenly told him she would go to the forest with him, and he was stunned. She told him she had often been to the forest and would guide him, so collecting material would go smoothly, but the sea worried the forest was too dangerous for her. Mercier told the boy to stay calm to ease his anxiety, then gripped her mop tightly. Mercier then said calmly that she was, after all, a servant. The girl told him this confidently while holding her mop in her hands as if it were a weapon. Isagi looked at the black-haired girl with a puzzled expression, unable to see how a maid's status affected her physical safety, and he learned that maids needed fighting power to protect their master. Isagi was momentarily taken aback by the girl's claim that maids needed combat power to do their jobs, and could only awkwardly accept that Mercia had combat skills. After a while, the boy and girl were in the forest. Isagi looked at its beauty in surprise, while the girl, already used to the area, was not surprised. They moved on. The boy watched the wildlife in Pomenia's forests with interest and curiosity. Mercia walked ahead, acting as a guide. Isagi studied the forest and realized that because it lay in the Beast Kingdom's territory, its plants were slightly different from those in the Empire, so he asked the black-haired girl about it. Mercia calmly explained that in nature there is a fierce struggle for survival, so this was normal for them. Animals and plants evolve faster on their own. While the girl explained why the animal kingdom's fauna differs from the Empire's, Isagi suddenly saw a bush. The animals and plants were not far from him, and he was drawn to them. Star-shaped fruits were growing on the bush. The man was very curious and wanted to touch one. Mercia stopped him and warned that touching the plant's fruit would release acid, and Isagi immediately pulled his hand away in fear. The boy felt embarrassed when he realized he should have examined the plants more carefully instead of reaching out, but Mercia knew the forest sometimes had dangerous plants like this one. Alchemists had an ability to examine any matter. A man frowned briefly, then opened his eyes wide and used the ability called examination on a fruit-bearing bush. This plant was called carambola. It grows in the forest in the southern part of the animal kingdom. If you squeeze its tree fruit, it will squirt the acid inside immediately. If the acid gets on your skin, wash it with water right away and begin treatment. The girl considered how to approach the plant. Isagi wanted to collect the carambola's woody fruits because it seemed to him they could serve as good raw material for a strong acid solution and a weeding solution. Mercia decided to help the man collect the fruits, using a thick cloth to catch them and prevent the acid from leaking, since the acid only splashed when the fruit was touched. Holding the fruit with a thick towel, the girl watched as Isagi easily cut it from the carambola plant with small scissors. Next, the man gathered raw materials from the tree fruits, lightly pierced the carambolas with a needle, collected the acidic solution into a test tube, put everything in his magic bag, and Mercier helped. Isagi wiped the sweat from his forehead with a slightly weary hand, then said aloud that, after all, practicing together was a very interesting and fun pastime for him. Mercia asked Isagi about gatherings in the Empire after hearing him, and she concluded from his words that such gatherings were generally not allowed there. The boy agreed with the girl's assumption. It was true. He had always been told it was better to have knights or adventurers gather the materials they needed. He had handled the materials himself, wanted to keep talking, but then suddenly stopped. Suddenly the girl screamed for her master. Isagi went pale, froze in horror, and stared off to the side in fear. Suddenly, a terrifying monster appeared before them. It resembled a boar, but was much larger than an ordinary one. The girl and the young man tried to move away quietly. They stared wearily at the huge boar that had suddenly appeared nearby. Isagi leaned close and whispered to the girl about the monster. Mercier then told him this huge, beastly boar was a demon, a violent creature that could attack anyone quickly with its large, sharp fangs. The demonic monster charged at them with its mouth wide open, rattling saliva flying to the sides and huge fangs bared as it prepared to attack. Isagi, pale and terrified, felt tense because of the situation's gravity and feared what they had to do to avoid being attacked and injured by the demonic monster. A girl called to him calmly, and he regained his senses enough to look straight at her. Mercier told him to leave it to her, saying she would handle the monster herself, then stepped confidently in front of him, leaving Isagi frightened and stunned as he tried to stop her. Meanwhile, a huge beast-like boar charged toward them. The demonic creature intended to attack the boy and girl. A giant boar charged at the girl. Mercia readied herself to face the beast. Isagi stood nearby, watching the girl with tense eyes. When the demonic monster approached and tried to attack the black-haired girl, she instantly vanished from his sight, so he could not strike her with his sharp fangs. Surprised by her sudden disappearance, the demonic monster turned its head in every direction to find its missing prey, while Isagi stood not far away, looking wearily at the demonic boar. When the demonic monster looked up, it saw something that made the beast-like boar's eyes widen briefly, and a girl's shadow fell across his face as she hovered directly above him. Mercy ended up directly above the demonic monster, jumped up and launched a somersault attack, while the huge boar noticed and rushed forward to avoid the black-haired girl's strike. Flipping through the air several times, Mercia closed in on the fleeing demonic monster and drew back her fist to strike the boar-like beast. Approaching the demonic monster, the girl raised her fist to strike the stunned boar-like beast, needing to end it quickly to keep Isagi safe. The girl stepped up to the demonic monster and punched it squarely in the snout, and the boar-like beast couldn't turn away in time and took the full force of the blow. Her attack sent the demonic boar flying several meters into a tree, and Isagi pulled back to avoid being struck by the beast as it flew off from the collision. She struck the monster with her fist and watched calmly as the demonic boar flew several meters away. The creature was defeated, and East Side's safety was no longer in danger. Isagi was stunned that Mercia had felled such a massive, fearsome demon with a single blow, and he stared in astonishment at the boar the black-haired girl had defeated. Mercier told him she could not allow her master Isagi to be burdened with unnecessary troubles like this. Mercier calmly brushed the dust off her maid outfit after the fight with the monstrous boar. Isagi knew the beast race had stronger physical abilities than other races, but Mercy's fighting power was far above normal, so the boy briefly doubted she was just a servant and asked her about it. Hearing the man's question, Marcia told him she really was a servant and paused for a second to choose her words. Mercier continued answering Asagi and explained that, as a human of the beast race, the girl could only serve in the imperial castle because of her great combat power. Mercia took many night jobs and agreed to them because she saw well in the dark, and her maidly appearance often fooled others. Sometimes bandits tried to attack her. The boy smiled warmly at the black-haired girl. In the Empire, where beast race people were looked down on, he thought it was natural to demand more from them. The girl suddenly remembered that, especially lately at work, people had been persistently pressuring her to take a dark job, so Mercio was relieved she could quit at the same time as Asagi, and the man was stunned by this information about the dark work. Isagi told Mercia that thanks to her and the other guards, a man like him could live safely in the castle. Surprised and stunned by his words, the girl looked at him. His Agi continued speaking, thanking his companion for all he has done and still does, and the man looked at Mercia with a grateful smile. She was amazed by his words of thanks. For a moment she fell silent and had no words to reply to his thanks. Blushing and embarrassed, Mercia said that because the night guard was a servant's duty, it was of course hers, and she meant it was a trivial matter. Mercy flushed and looked away in embarrassment, not at the man, while her black animal tail wagged in every direction and revealed her true mood, and Isagi thought the tasks she sometimes handled were usually the duties of knights. The man changed the subject and noticed something. Isagi remembered a magic stone should be inside the demonic monster. Mercia heard about it for the first time and knew nothing about the stone. Isagi explained to her that the monster's magical energy, drawn from the air and from eating prey, is stored in its magic stone. Alchemists use those stones to make various items. Isagi then approached Boer's body. The man confidently traced the demon's flow of magic across its body to pinpoint the exact location of the beast-like boar's magic stone. After a while, Isagi pressed his palm to the beast-like boar and pinpointed the magic flow, feeling it in the demonic monster's neck. After that, Isagi searched his magic bag, pulled out a dagger, and aimed it directly at the spot where the beast-like boar's magical power flowed. After cutting the monster's skin where its magic flowed, the boy and the black-haired girl saw a strange, incredible object, and the Sagi stared at it in shock. A magic stone from the boar-like beast appeared before them. It was huge, and its magic was very strong, making the creature a valuable prize. The girl disagreed, saying this demonic creature, though large, was only medium-sized in this forest, and her words left him stunned. In the imperial capital, monsters larger than the palm of your hand are rare, but here a giant boar is a normal-sized monster to the locals, so Isagi asked Mercia how many monsters lived around Paminia village. Mercia paused, then told Isagi that unless they cut the number of monsters regularly, a herd would come to their village, Pulminia, and Isagi was stunned. At last he had a great chance to gather many high-quality magic stones, and now it was practically within his reach. Isagi eagerly decided to turn the magic stones into raw materials to make a new fertilizer, because it would be much faster for them than making it from materials with only some magical power. The girl suggested they collect many magic stones from the beast-like monsters, and Isagi agreed, so they began looking for the next monster to extract stones from. The girl briefly halted their hunt for the next monsters. Before they set out to search with the magic stones, Mercia wanted to tell Isagi something. Isagi watched her, waiting for her next words. The girl intended to take the demon meat from the boar-like beast she had defeated because demon flesh was very tasty, and Mercia had already climbed down onto the beast's body. The boy apologized when he understood the girl's request, since Isagi was too focused on gathering raw materials for fertilizer, and Marcia needed a little time to get meat from the demonic boar. Mercia began clearing the monster. While the girl cut up the boar, the boy pulled a wooden barrel from his magic bag. Isagi realized this place was different from the imperial castle. To survive, they had to find their own food. Mercia, for example, was methodically cutting up the carcass of a demonic boar. Beside her on the ground lay tools for cutting up the carcass of a beast-like boar and a bucket for cleaning up liquids. She put all the meat straight into a wooden barrel. The boy realized he was still only gathering materials and making what others asked, watching Mercia butcher the carcass of a beast-like boar until Isagi called to the black-haired girl and distracted her from the task. Isagi looked at the girl after his call and asked her to teach him how to cut up a carcass. Mercia heard the request. She stood beside the hanging boar carcass to make cutting easier. Mercia paused, stunned when the boy suddenly asked her to teach him how to butcher a monster, and looked at Isagi in surprise. A moment later, the girl smiled warmly at the guy and agreed to Sagi's request to help him learn how to cut up a carcass. Soon their small cloth bag brimmed with magic stones, and the job was done. Mercia suggested Isagi return to the village. The slain monsters lay beside them, and he realized the pile of magic stones would be enough to make a new fertilizer. Isagi wanted to return to the village and took a step forward, but he felt something under his foot and stopped, unable to continue. Isagi dropped to one knee and stared at his palm in shock. It was stained with the dirt he had just stepped on. The boy noticed the soil quality in the woods was slowly changing and realized it was because they had gone far into the woods. For that reason, the boy did not want to return to the village. Izagi wanted to explore farther into the forest. He told his companion about it. Mercia was cleaning the daggers after cutting up demonic monsters. The boy then pointed to a distant mountain, and Sagi wanted to ask the girl if it contained ore, so the girl, hearing the question, looked toward the mountain. She told him ore was mined on that mountain, but Mercia worried that going straight to fetch it would take too long. Yasagi reassured Marcia that everything was fine, explaining that with alchemy he could find the ore deposit's approximate location, so the process would not take as long as she thought, and she stopped worrying. The boy fixed his gaze on the distant mountain, because ore deposits there would let Isagi build more golems and buildings, and that interested him. Excited, Isagi told his companion it was time to go look for ore. Ore deposits were on a nearby mountain. Eventually they reached the mountain they were heading for, and along the way they had to walk a narrow path on the slope, so the girl, worried about him, asked if he was all right. Isaki told her he was fine, but he was actually terrified and tense because the mountain path was so narrow he could fall straight off the cliff. Walking was difficult for him because he was nervous, and cold sweat ran down his face as he feared slipping and falling on the narrow mountain path. Mercio walked the narrow path easily and without fear because she found the route simple, and the man watching felt a little envious that she moved so deftly even in her maid uniform. She suddenly jumped straight down from the narrow path, skipping the whole descent and making her way easier. Because Isagi couldn't jump like the girl, he had to go down and walk all the narrow, dangerous paths himself. Later, when a tired man approached Mercia, she told him there was an underground passage beside them. Fatigue and tension left the boy breathing heavily as they crossed the dangerous narrow mountain paths, and the hard descent left Isagi drenched in sweat and exhausted, but they finally reached the place they needed. The boy and girl entered the underground passage they needed. Isagi noticed it looked very old. Mercia explained that because it had been dug long ago, it was showing signs of wear. Isagi examined the underground passage and realized that burning had hardened the earth and kept the ceiling and walls from collapsing, and the passage's wooden supports were old but still held the ceiling firmly. He asked Mercy's permission to reinforce the worn section of the underground passage. She agreed. The boy lifted his hand and activated his magic. A large magic circle appeared at the entrance to the underground passage, and Isagi used alchemy to rebuild and reinforce the entire passage. He soon succeeded, and the underground passage was reinforced and ready for his exploration and search for ore deposits. After strengthening it, Marcia led the man inside. Isagi waited for her to enter the passage. The girl walked a short distance ahead, leading him straight into the underground passage while he carefully examined the entrance and its design. Isagi stepped into the underground passage and felt gloomy because it was too dark for him, leaving him sad since he could not study its structure or navigate it well. Isagi then remembered that the Beastmen people could see well in the dark, so the girl could safely walk through the underground passage. Worried, Mercia quickly apologized to the man for forgetting to bring a lamp for him to light the passage. The man pulled the lamp from his magic bag, twisted its button, and lit it. A stone inside the lamp made it light the underground passage. The lamp's warm light lit the passage. Isagi wanted to keep walking along the underground passage, using it to light the way. It was a magical device shaped like a lamp. Mercia looked at the device in surprise. The girl decided to carry the magic device herself, so Isagi could focus on finding ore deposits, and the man thanked her for her help. Soon they were deep in an underground passage, the girl walking ahead with a lamp to light their way, while Isagi carefully inspected the mine to find ore deposits. Using his alchemist sense, the boy soon found the suspected location of the ore deposit and pointed the way for them with his finger. The man approached the stone wall of the underground passage, placed his palm on a specific spot, and used alchemical abilities to sense something inside. That section of the underground passage's stone wall held huge ore deposits. The man told his companion about them eagerly. Mercia held a lamp that lit the passage. She set the lamp down, suddenly produced a pickaxe, and was about to dig into the ore when Isagi said there was no need. Isagi explained to Mercia that the man could have removed the ore from the wall another way. If alchemy can strengthen matter by channeling magical power through it, it can also make matter more fragile. Placing his palms on a weak spot in the stone wall of the underground passage, the boy made a magic circle appear immediately because applying force to a structurally weak point would work. The goal was to destroy the stone wall, blocking the underground passage to reach the ore deposits. Vinizagi used alchemy, while a magic circle spread across the wall. Soon the ore they needed began to spill out of the ruined spot where the magic circle had appeared. Isagi saw this and told the black-haired girl to pick up the ore that had fallen from the deposits. After that, the boy placed his hand on the stone wall of the underground passage once more. Isagi wanted to resume extracting ore from the deposits. Easily finding and marking the deposits, he watched as several alchemical circles appeared on the stone wall. Then he aimed and struck the ore deposits. Mercia saw this and was shocked. The girl had nearly gathered all the ores that had fallen from the stone wall of the underground passage into a bag. A second later, ores began pouring rapidly from the spots marked by magic circles. Hisagi rushed forward to find new ore deposits. Stones of various ores kept falling from the broken section of the stone wall and hitting the floor. Isagi called to Mercia, causing the man to stop and turn toward the black-haired girl. Marcia wanted the boy to slow his search for ore, because her legs were completely covered in ore up to her knees, and when Isagi realized his mistake, he immediately apologized to the black-haired girl, stunned. Eventually the girl freed herself from the large ore blockage, and Isagi told her they would sort and extract the ore on site, so Mercia accepted his order and obeyed. The boy sat on the floor with the black-haired girl, both soggy, and carefully examined each piece of ore. Meanwhile, Mercia waited calmly for his assessment while sorting through the piles of ore. A lamp stood beside them, lighting everything. The boy soon realized they had found many different ores, including iron ore, copper ore, lead and magic ore, plus a little gold and some precious stones. Isagi kept carefully examining the ore samples, but as he expected, the ores they received contained no adamantite or mithril. The girl said she did not expect anything else from Mystery Sagi, and the man, surprised by her sudden words, did not understand what she meant as he looked at Mercia with a puzzled expression. Explaining to him, she said this drilling technology would be in high demand among many people, and in doing so highlighted Isagi's excellent abilities. Isagi told her that alchemists were actually sent to the extraction chambers, and because life there was so harsh, the nobility regarded it as hard labor. Isagi was sent there often. The boys' faces darkened at the memory. The hard labor was brutal. Mercier grew concerned about the boy's changed mood. A second later, the man came to his senses and calmed down, trying to forget the place's unpleasant memories, since Isagi had to start processing the ore they had just received. Usagi pointed his open palm directly at the ore to channel magic into it. His magic then began to affect the ore, turning the ugly lump into a solid ingot and completely changing its structure, and the girl collected one processed ingot that day. The ingot's surface was so smooth and clean it reflected like a mirror, and the girl stared at it in amazement. The man kept processing different ores because he wanted to speed up the work. The woman recovered from the shock and began helping him, who was soaked. Soon they went back to work in silence. Isagi focused on processing the ore he had received, while the girl waited calmly and helped him sometimes. When the work was done, almost every type of ore had been processed. Several ingots of different sizes lay on the floor. The man, seeing the results, decided it was time to leave the underground passage. The girl asked the boy whether they'd mined much ore from the mountain, and he said they had collected a large amount, which made Isagi sure many things could be made from it. The boy was delighted he could increase the number of golems, and Isagi was eager to strengthen the main field and create easier-to-use farming tools to increase the harvest. Isagi was beside himself with happiness, not just from making these things but because he could make them. The girl didn't understand what he was saying, so she asked him about it. Isagi turned to the black-haired girl and looked at Mercio with a satisfied expression. Mercio did not answer the girl's question. They soon reached the village and stood on an empty lot not far from their home, and then Isagi eagerly told the black-haired girl he wanted to set up his workshop right there. Surprised by his words, the girl asked him again about the workshop. Isagi explained that if the alchemical process failed, an explosion could blow up the building and create strong odors, so he wanted a workshop separate from the house. Mercia offered to help him build the workshop, but Isagi refused, saying he could handle it himself. The man changed the subject. He told Marcia the second harvest season had arrived, so the girl would really help him if she worked with the other villagers in the fields. Marcia listened. The boy had already turned away from Marcia as she left. The girl carried a basket toward the fields to help the villagers with the second season harvest. Alone now, Isagi was ready to get to work, since building the workshop would be a huge job and he wanted to start as soon as possible. First, he needed to choose the workshop size. Using his steps, he tried to work out the size they needed. Isagi dreamed of a much larger workshop. Finding a large workshop would be hard to maintain and support. He set that option aside and used tape and posts to mark out the size of the house he needed. Isagi realized he did not need to divide the workshop into separate rooms, and that one workstation plus a storage room in the building would be enough, so he began to unwind the tape. Soon the boy used tape and posts to mark a plot for his workshop, roughly the size he wanted and larger than his house plot. Soon the boy brought materials to build a workshop, including damp prepared wood for the structure and bricks to strengthen it, and now he had to prepare the mortar. The boy pulled out a wooden box and set it on the ground. From a cloth bag, he poured cement and sand into the box. He used a ratio of 1:3 for the cement and sand. Isagi then used alchemy to instantly turn the cement and sand into a homogeneous mass by placing a magic circle on the box to mix everything. Next, he made a hole in the center of the box and slowly poured in water while stirring the mixture again, and when the lumps dissolved and the mixture thickened, everything was ready. Soon the mortar in the wooden box was ready, and as expected it was thick and free of lumps. Using his magic power, the boy began laying bricks along the outer wall and simultaneously covered the bricks with cement using a magic circle. Isagi covered them with cement and began laying bricks on top again, methodically repeating the cycle of laying bricks and covering them with cement. Isagi's workshop was nearly finished. Most of the work was done, and only the roof still needed to be completed as the boy looked over his workshop. Isagi started sweating from building the workshop, and the man, seeing it nearly finished, noticed that even with only the bricks in place, it already had a pleasant atmosphere. The man began planning his next steps. Construction of the workshop continued. He planned to decorate the workshop's interior. After a while, the girl returned from the fields carrying a basket. Having helped the other villagers with the harvest, she was done. Marcia stepped forward without looking. Turning toward the workshop, the girl called to the man to ask how construction on his workshop was going. She could now see the man's workshop clearly. Mercier froze for a moment, admiring the building. A tall, attractive brick house stood before her. It was simple and unpretentious, with a warm, cozy feel. Boards in a box nearby showed it had only just been completed. Heading toward the newly built workshop, she stepped outside, heard the man's voice, and Usagi felt relieved that the rooms finally looked like an alchemist's workshop. Mercier quietly knocked on the workshop door and asked Usagi for permission to enter, and although he was busy, he heard her voice and immediately let her in. Mercius opened Usagi's workshop door but did not enter, standing at the entrance for a moment because she was stunned by the scene inside. A well-lit room with windows appeared before the girl, a table of alchemical devices already inside, open boxes on the floor, and Usagi busily arranging things. He looked awkwardly at the frozen girl, and Usagi told her he was only doing interior design. Marcia watched the man with quiet admiration. She complimented the man on the house's appearance, noting the workshop's exterior walls were beautiful and the interior was well decorated, which made Usagi blush and feel delighted by her words. He eagerly launched into a non-stop account of how he built his workshop, explaining that adjusting the wood-resin ratio dimmed the walls and reduced the glare. Usagi's action changed the light reflectivity, warming the room colors without being too dazzling, and he kept talking with great enthusiasm about the line of his workshop. The man wanted an antique atmosphere in the house, so he bricked one wall. Isaki was fascinated by the story of how he built the workshop. Mercy had just listened to his story and smiled warmly when she saw him. The girl, with a warm smile, congratulated the man on finishing the building, since he finally had a proper workshop for his experiments and research, and Mercia was happy for him. Smiling, Isagi accepted the girl's congratulations and thanked Mercy, then leaned in toward her. Mercy blushed at the close contact, and he, not noticing, cheerfully said he could now do as much research as he wanted. Embarrassed by his closeness, the girl blushed and quickly turned away, then awkwardly offered to help arrange the furniture, and Isagi accepted. Then the boy remembered something, and Isagi asked the black-haired girl to put a bed in the workshop so he could nap there. Mercia immediately refused his request for a bed in the workshop, leaving the man stunned and wanting to know why she had refused so quickly. Mercier said with a grim look that if she put a bed in his workshop, he would end up sleeping there to avoid the trouble, because she knew he would become too lazy to go into the house. Stunned by her explanation, Usagi found no way to argue against it and had to accept the black-haired girl's words. Mercia remained stubborn on that point, refusing to yield to Usagi, and the boy realized she saw right through him. The man intended to ask the woman something other than a bed. Mercia already knew and refused his request to put a sofa in the workshop. Mercia pouted and said she was doing all this for the boy's health, then indignantly told him to go to bed properly in his own house. Isagi, feeling pressured, awkwardly agreed with pouting Mercia and accepted that he couldn't sleep in his workshop. The man quickly changed the subject to ease the black-haired girl's pressure, suggested she start making fertilizer right away, and Mercia agreed to help. To make fertilizer fit Paminia's soil, they gathered materials from the village's forests and mines. Isagi recalled the demonic boar and the ore-filled underground passage. Finally, that day they were going to make a new fertilizer. The boy held the plant and set it among the materials already arranged on the table. Mercier handed him a drawing board. To begin, they needed the 3 kinds of fertilizer the villagers in Paminia had originally used. The boy looked at the 3 bags of fertilizer on the table. Isagi then asked Mercia about the results of improving the properties of the 3 fertilizers from Paminia village, and she began to give her report. She then told him the fertilizers from Plumina were still inferior to those made in the Empire, reading the information directly from the document. Mercier handed Isagi a document containing detailed progress data so he could read it. After carefully reviewing the document, Isagi noticed that only the current fertilizer had a limit and examined the tables with a serious expression. He figured it would be better to mix the fertilizer with another raw material. Mercia, hearing this, said they would need a lot of time. He realized that starting fertilizer production from scratch could take several years or longer, but they had a document with all the Empire's fertilizer data. They had plenty of high-quality magic stones, and the boy smiled as he showed the black-haired girl the stone they had taken from the monsters, so he wasn't worried. The girl looked at the soggy stone with a questioning look. After all, they had taken those magic stones from monsters in the forest. They seemed low quality to her. The man confirmed the magic stones were excellent. He told her that in the imperial capital, one of those magic stones cost 20 silver coins, and Mercio was stunned at how expensive they were. In their village Paminia, magic stones were usually sold for 1 silver coin, and Isagi was so shocked by the price that the magic stone slipped from his hand. Stunned, the boy called to the black-haired girl and asked in disbelief if the magic stones were common in her village of Paminia. Thoughtfully, the girl agreed that magic stones were common in their village. She also told him that everyone here had at least 1 magic stone. Isagi reacted with even greater shock. His reply to the girl came in a low, defeated voice. Mercia looked puzzled as she watched him shrink at her words. Isagi snapped back to his senses, already smiling at his reflection in the magic stone, and confidently told his companion he would turn the stone into top-quality fertilizer. They got back to work. Isagi wanted to add the magic stone to the fertilizer first, so he asked Mercia to prepare pots for the experiment, and she agreed and went to do it. Meanwhile, Isagi tried to bring the magical power under control. Then he picked up the magic stone, and it immediately rose into the air. To make the stone's chaotic magic easier to control, the boy had to balance it. The stone in his hands began to spill its power. The magic stone rose higher, magic power surged from it, and Isagi confidently controlled the flow. Eventually, the magic in the stone settled and was brought under control. Isagi then used alchemy to remove its foreign impurities. Everything was ready. A magic stone, purified to remove foreign impurities, hovered above his hand. Isagi smiled as he looked at the stone ready for use. After the magic stone was cleaned and arranged, Mercia came to the boy carrying many pots. Isagi thanked the black-haired girl for bringing the pots. The grill was drawn to the magic stone Isagi had processed, and its appearance was unlike the others after being refined and cleared of impurities, while Mercy looked at it with interest. She noticed the polished magic stone was very beautiful. It gave off a pure purple glow. Isagi told her that in the Empire, some aristocrats wore stones like that as jewelry. Mercy gazed at the beautiful magic stone, her eyes full of admiration, and wondered what other uses these stones might have. Mercy watched in growing horror as the man callously crushed beautiful magic stones and mixed them with fertilizer. Isagi showed no concern for their appearance and destroyed them without pity. Seeing her upset, the man still apologized to the black-haired girl, since she had loved the beauty of the magic stones, and Mercia was a little disappointed by their destruction. In a feigned calm voice, she told him the magic stone was only an object and she wouldn't worry about it, but she still looked sadly at the pots. The girl hurried off to fetch more pots for Isagi. The boy, still grinding the stone, agreed. Isagi still watched the departing Mercy with concern. Seeing how upset the girl was when the beautiful magic stone was destroyed and how her animal ears drooped, Isagi decided to give her some magic stone jewelry next time. Isagi told himself this was another reason to keep going while he ground the ingredients to make a new fertilizer for Pulminia village's soil. To the magic stone, the boy added densely growing grass with a strong reproductive factor, terraria with strong insect resistance, and genjid to increase biodegradability, then mixed them with other materials they had collected from the forest. The boy soon prepared a prototype of the new fertilizer. Mercia, holding a pot, suggested he test it immediately. Next, the pot was marked with a different number in ink. It was their first experiment, so the pot was painted with the number 1. Then they filled the pot with soil. Immediately, they planted a selectively bred arugula seed in the pot's soil, covered it with more soil, and watered it. Right then, a sprout pushed up from the arugula seed in the pot, and Isagi was stunned by how fast the plant grew. The plant kept growing without pause. It did not stop for a moment. The sprout soon became a fully mature arugula plant. Isagi looked with delight at the ripe arugula. Its nutritious bunches were plentiful because it had grown so quickly. Isagi looked at the ripe plant, arugula, and admired how much it had grown with this fertilizer. He was about to write the result on the experimental sheet. To everyone's surprise, the arugula plant kept growing until it towered over the boy and the girl, and Isagi watched in delighted shock. Arugula shot up to several meters, its stems thick and abnormal from rapid growth and extra nutrients, and the pot began to shake as it expanded so quickly. Mercia stared at the plant in astonishment. Beside her, the boy watched as the arugula reached the ceiling and its branches began to grip the wooden boards above. Mercia casually told Isagi that if the arugula plant grew anymore, the workshop's walls and ceiling would simply collapse. Isagi immediately became afraid. Isagi sprinted to the pot with the arugula, and a moment later he aimed his palm at the base of the stem as the boy knocked the pot over. Isagi channeled magic into the plant to destroy its base, stopping its growth and preventing it from destroying the house. Quickly, he pushed the whole plant he had destroyed using alchemy right off the table onto the floor. Isagi realized with horror that this was dangerous, and looking gloomily at the plant he had knocked over, he understood his curiosity had nearly ruined his newly built workshop. The girl pointed out they had never expected the plant to grow so much. Mercia thought it was all because the grass was growing so densely. It was possible, but Ire thought it was also due to the synergy of high-quality magic. This was their first failed experiment. In that case, Isagi decided to try extracting magic power from a magic stone, and had to choose the right one to see how the brewed raw materials would turn out. To create the best fertilizer for Paminia's soil, he had to try each method one by one. The boy stood thoughtfully, watching the plant that had grown from the failed fertilizer he had made. Isagi smiled and told the girl that this fertilizer job would not be easy, but they had to work hard to get a good result, while Mercia cleaned up the failed arugula plant. She backed the boy's words with a warm smile. Mercia held a pot of plants and hoped she could help him make fertilizer for the village of Pulminia. Some time had passed, and it was already raining outside, but the boy and the girl stayed in the workshop despite the weather. They marked the pot again with a distinctive number plate. It was their second experiment. Isagi again planted the arugula seeds in a pot using a different fertilizer. The outcome was the same as before. The arugula grew huge again, and Isagi knew what to do. By then it was his 73rd experiment. The result was the opposite, as the plant grew to normal size and then immediately withered and died, leaving Isagi upset. The next fertilizer trial also disappointed them. They had planted another plant, a sweet pepper, but its fruits appeared and then withered along with the plant. Mercia was worried about this. As night fell outside, the boy and the girl were still in the workshop, working on experiments to create the perfect fertilizer. The number of their experiments had already reached double digits. They had already reached their 200th experiment. She was once again gluing distinctive signs onto clay pots. Isagi sat at his desk, weary but focused, writing new fertilizer recipes and working out the flaws in past experiments as crumpled sheets of paper piled up. He paused his work on new fertilizer recipes and looked up. Isagi looked up with a tired smile, his gaze unfocused. The way he and Marcia kept repeating experiments to improve things reminded him of their time in the Empire. The boy felt a little nostalgic from the memory, but he still had to keep improving the fertilizer recipes. After a while, they began another experiment. The table held broken pots from failed experiments. They planted the same pepper seed in a new pot. Mercia carefully began pouring water over the pot with the planted seed. Shai and Isagi were tense about the risk of a mistake. The boy was ready to remove the failed alchemy experiment. At that exact moment, after watering the soil, the seed immediately sprouted. This is already their 252nd experiment with fertilizer. Isagi and Mercia watched the sprout nervously, ready as it soon grew into a full sweet pepper plant bearing ripe fruit. The plant was beautiful, and its sweet peppers looked fully ripe and juicy. Isagi and Marcia were stunned to see the plant had stopped growing. Mercy told him the stem and leaves showed no abnormal growth, and confirmed the plant produced the same results as the Empire's fertilizer. There was only one conclusion, and Isagi leaned against the table, stunned and silent, quietly saying in shock and disbelief that everything was ready. Tears of joy in his eyes, the boy picked up the pot, holding their successful fertilizer experiment, that had taken them 3 weeks of selfless work. By making fertilizer from only village materials, they solved the fertilizer shortage. Isagi agreed loudly and happily with the black-haired girl, and now the village's crops will be safe too. The boy sank immediately. Realizing he was the village's only alchemist, he knew fertilizer production could stop if anything happened to him. Mercier suggested the boy give the fertilizer recipe to the city's alchemists so they could make it, but Isagi doubted the alchemists could recreate it because their alchemy skills were too weak. Samasia eagerly suggested another option to Isagi, saying they could make an easier recipe, but Isagi hesitated because he did not know how skilled the city's alchemists were. Silence filled the room for a moment. Mercia felt dejected after failing to find a way out of the situation. Isagi considered a solution. Finding no solution, the boy and girl postponed the issue because they did not want to think about complicated things. Their 250-second experiment produced fertilizer. Early the next day, Isagi thanked the girl for the meal she had made. The vegetables were delicious, and Mercier agreed, and the boy carried the dirty dishes to the sink where the girl was already washing them. Isagi decided to help her with the dishes and started washing them. She thanked him for his help. Isagi noticed that when he and Marcia did things together, their conversations sometimes fell into awkward silence. Isagi felt no awkwardness around her for some reason and continued washing the dishes with a warm smile. Isagi tried to speak to Mercia, saying that when they stood side by side and did household chores, they looked like a married couple, and she shuddered as her face went bright red. Mercia flushed and turned away from the boy, repeating the words about the married couple in embarrassment, then stammered as she timidly tried to say something to him. Her next words were cut off by a knock at their door. The visitor was looking for the alchemist Isagi. He told the girl he'd open the door and that she should keep washing the dishes. Isagi soon noticed Mercia was clearly upset about something, her face gloomy and her cat tail lashing with anger, but she told him in a flat voice that everything was fine. Isagi reached the door, thinking Mercia was upset because the black-haired girl disliked washing dishes, and then he opened it to a stranger. Soon a bag appeared in front of him, and Isagi, seeing no one, was surprised there was nobody around until someone called to him from below. A dwarf girl from the beast race. She carried a huge, heavy backpack. Seeing her, the boy realized she was a human of the beast race, specifically of the dog race, and noting her small size assumed she was a child. Happily, the girl introduced herself to him. Her name was Kanya. She represented the wonderful trading company and had come for important negotiations with a man, namely Hisagi. Isagi did not expect them to want to negotiate with him. The girl confirmed this with a smile and asked his permission to negotiate and go over the case details at his house. Realizing this, he let her into the house, led her to the reception area, and she apologized for intruding on his home. Kanya hurried up the front steps and tried to get into the house. At the same time, she made no move to remove her huge backpack. Her huge, fully packed backpack kept her from getting into Isagi's house, and despite pushing with all her strength, Isagi told her the backpack would not fit through his front door. As a result, Kanya had to leave her huge, full backpack outside the house, where it sat alone on the ground. After sitting down, she apologized to them for the trouble. Kanya wanted to say more to Isagi and the black-haired girl, but did not know the latter's name. A silence fell across the room. She didn't know how to address the person she was speaking with. Kanai's long look surprised Mercy. Kanai then asked the boy admiringly whether Mercia was his wife, and the sudden question shocked the girl. Excited, the boy told Kanya that this girl was his servant and the village chief's daughter, while Marcia shook all over from overwhelming emotion. Kanya awkwardly apologized to the girl for her question, but Mercia smiled and told her not to worry, then said she would go make tea for everyone. Isagi noticed the girl humming happily as she left, and was surprised to see Mercy in a good mood, since she had been angry and unhappy not long ago. The man was thoughtful because of Mercia's quick, shifting moods. A woman's heart remained a mystery to him. The smiling girl carrying a tray walked away toward the kitchen. Soon Mercia brought the tea she had prepared. Kanyania stared at the girl's tea in amazement, and Isagi, Mercia, and Kanya enjoyed themselves. Kanya felt flattered by the tea. After Kanya, the dog racer took the cup in her hands and tasted the teeth the girl had prepared. Kanaya said happily that besides the bitterness, the tea had a subtle sweetness, so it tasted quite nice. Kanaya asked what Mercia used to make the tea. Mercia had brewed wolfberry leaves gathered from a nearby forest. Kanya was delighted by this information and immediately wrote in her notebook about tea made from wolfberry leaves, noting that brewing them yields a wonderfully pleasant taste. Kanya wanted them, so she bought them. She quickly wrote down the information in a notebook. Isagi was stunned when she suddenly pulled a notebook out from somewhere. As the girl took notes on wolfberry leaves, Isagi whispered to Mercia about a promising trading company, and the man wanted to know what kind it was. Mercia told him that Wonderful was an exceptionally large, successful trading company, even in the Beast Kingdom. Not only did it have its main office in the royal capital, it also had branches in many cities. All of its employees were half-human members of the dog race. He was surprised by how big the company was and couldn't understand why a businesswoman named Konya from that firm would come to him. She quickly wrote down all the information in her notebook, slammed it shut, and apologized to them for the wait. Kanai told them she had recently noticed a sharp rise in high-quality crops at the markets. The boy and Mercia were stunned by her words. Cognan was impressed that these crops grew quickly and could be harvested year-round. They were also much tastier than the crops grown in the animal kingdom until now. Searching for the source of this remarkable crop led her straight to the village of Paminia. Her journey to reach the village was long. Mercia realized she was talking about Puminia's harvest. Izagi also understood why she had come. Because the village's harvest had recently increased, the merchants must have gone to other villages to trade. Konya learned Isagi was the source of the increased harvest, and she agreed with his words as her tail wagged wildly with excitement. She found it odd that other villages grew Plumina village's crops but couldn't match the results. For Isagi, it was natural. Konya was shocked by his answer. Isagi explained he had developed the crops using alchemy tailored to this area's soil, and though they were easy to grow here, achieving the same quality elsewhere would be difficult, so Konya realized it all came down to the soil. She was surprised they used alchemy in farming. They used alchemy's power to choose crops. The girl carefully wrote the information in her notebook. Isagi agreed with Kanya's words. Kanya kept writing everything in her notebook. As a businesswoman at a large trading company, she grasped information quickly and had a vivid imagination. After finishing her notes, the girl closed the notebook and moved on to the main topic of the negotiations. Konya asked Isagi if he could regularly sell his harvest wholesale to the wonderful trading company, and that offer surprised him and Mercia. He realized, unfortunately, that the resources available around the village were limited. Their connections to a large trading company were important to them. The man wasn't opposed to the offer, but had conditions. Konya wanted to hear his conditions for the negotiations. Isagi told her he was an alchemist, so without materials he could not create anything, and he needed her to deliver the materials he wanted as a priority. Faced with his condition about supplying the alchemy materials he wanted, the girl simply nodded to them and smiled calmly. With a proud smile, she told him it was no problem for them thanks to their wonderful trading company, and there was no material they could not get from the Beast Kingdom. Isagi asked the girl about alchemy materials outside the Empire, and Kanya awkwardly turned away from the boy because she could not guarantee that. No one had any more questions, and Kanai asked how much Mercia and Isagi could reliably sell at wholesale, a crucial issue that needs attention because trade depends on it. Prepared for the question, he drafted a document outlining the current harvest volume, which will shorten the discussion and structure the conversation about trade. Cornea began tracking the weekly yields closely. She asked how much of the harvest they could supply. That is probably the most important question. Confidently, Mercia said that nothing was impossible for Mr. Isagi's improved varieties and that the amount of work would match the supplies. Kanai was amazed by the boys' dedication to the business. Their eagerness to begin trading was obvious. She was pleasantly surprised by how fast it was, since the guys can send cargo every week. She asked if it was possible to increase supply volume to make the work more efficient. Isaki thought it over. It is hard to actually increase the volume. Right now, only Gollum and the men are left to work, and harder work in the fields will leave them with no strength for anything. He considers how they can combine producing one type of fertilizer, selecting varieties, and working with the manufacturer of magical instruments. It's still too soon for him to commit to working as a real farmer. He still had a lot to do, and it wasn't the time for something so serious yet, so Konya suggested hiring people to manage the fields, which would make the job easier. Isagi and Marcia repeated the words that had been spoken. Within a few moments, they realized this had become fashionable. They had never thought that part of the work could be delegated to someone else. Isagi realized he hadn't thought of something so simple, probably because being forced to work until exhaustion made it hard to believe it could actually be done. Convinced Konya's idea was brilliant, the girl said Isagi should focus on studying alchemy and let others handle the fields so they can breed even more varieties of vegetables and fruits. His hand closed into a fist. Isagi is now determined to follow Konya's instructions. He plans to turn the unused land into a large field. This will be a major breakthrough for their work. Punia suggested setting the large field aside for a farm. Isagi and Mercia thought it over again, realizing another simple idea had escaped them this time too, but there was nothing to worry about because the important thing was that they had learned about it. The three sat at a table in the middle of a vast, endless field. Isagi realized that improving a whole farm would be a great idea. It will help him both establish trade and personally cultivate new varieties. Isagi already imagines growing many crops on a large farm and sending them to market. Konya is already looking forward to the wonderful company selling those goods everywhere. Isagi and Kona's aura, burning with a thirst for profit, drove Mercia back. The girl already knows how much work lies ahead for them. Konya offers her hand to the man and wishes prosperity for his large farm. From now on, the man looks forward to working with the trading company. Mercia was relieved that things turned out this way. They will have even more opportunities over time to grow new plants. Unsure what to do with the staff now, he considered hiring contract workers from the trading company, which would ease some tasks, but he still wanted to look for a few more solutions. This wasn't a great idea, so he decided to recruit workers in the village first. He thinks they'll have to ask others if the village doesn't supply enough people. A girl approached and handed the man a glass with a drink. Isagi asks her if the villagers will respond to the job posting as usual, which worries the guy a lot because he doesn't know how things will turn out. Lately, the village's food situation has improved a lot, and he wonders if anyone will still want to work on his farm now that people can feed themselves. She is certain people will always be found. All the residents are deeply grateful to him. He helped the residents in many ways and taught them various things. Isagi wants his farm workers to feel that working there will benefit them. She realized how generous and caring her master is toward others. He takes the drink and feels the glass warm his hands. The girl realizes her master has a kind heart. She believes they can make a profit by producing varieties the man has not yet given the villagers, which will give them enough incentive to at least attend a job interview. It would be nice to be able to create varieties that can only be bred in a specific place, and the locals would be happy to keep them for themselves. The girl suggested planting fruits like apples and bananas. Seconds later, the girl with glowing eyes suggested planting grapes. Her eagerness to taste the berries was obvious. Isagi apologized, saying the grapes were still being developed. The girl became very upset when she heard the news, and the man realized she truly loved grapes. She did not respond and only asked to be notified when the grapes could be improved. Isagi is deciding where to start his business. They have a lot of work ahead that requires order and structure. 5 workers are needed, but transaction volume and profit are unclear, so he will run a small pilot with a few people to test the work, and the main income should rise once there is enough work. She told him she would ask her father for permission to recruit workers and left. Isagi sincerely hopes everything goes very smoothly. Running a big farm takes a lot of work. 5 days after Isagi posted the recruitment notices, he was reading a book when Mercier burst in with urgent news, gasping for breath. Isagi asked whether anyone had replied to the recruitment requests, and the girl looked shocked. They received a flood of applications and had more than 10 times the workers needed. A huge crowd showed up at the guy's house, all wanting to try the business and work on the farm. Nobody expected so many people to come for an interview. A crowd gathered at the house entrance. They clearly didn't expect so many people to apply for jobs. The first candidate was a mutual friend of Isagi and Mercia. Naya had applied too. She finds it amusing, and few people would refuse a steady salary when the job is interesting. Nayan noticed there were quite a few candidates. Isagi admitted he would hire everyone who wants to work there, but he has to narrow the candidate pool by holding interviews. Irnia drew Isaga's attention. Her expression turned incredibly cute, like a kitten. She asked the guy whether they were friends. The girl hinted that she should work on the farm. Suddenly Mercia appeared behind the girl, her gaze promising nothing good. One look calmed the job candidate in seconds and left her feeling awkward. The girl said the interview was being held without exception. Then she was pushed aside and asked to stand in line. The girl's argument reached him, and he felt a little awkward overhearing their conversations. Isagi hadn't expected so many people to want to work on his farm, and he was pleased because he could now form a team. It was time to start the interview, so Isagi apologized to everyone for the wait and got to work. Yin Mercy faced a lot of work because they had to analyze every single job candidate. Isagi listened closely to everyone who came to talk about their candidacy, and he could not ignore even the smallest detail because every moment mattered for hiring people to work on his farm. The next day, some of the boys were called to the farm, and they took it as a sign they had been accepted for work, which pleased them because they were among the few who had passed the selection. 5 of those chosen were happy to have passed the interview, but many others attended and were not hired. When Nea heard this, she rushed forward and embraced Mercia with wild joy. Mercia, however, did not welcome the tenderness but did not refuse and stood reserved beside the newly elected worker. Isagi asked them to introduce themselves, even though they probably already knew each other, because introductions are a key step for teams to start working together in any company. Nea gave her name and said she had helped her grandfather in the fields, which was a strong asset and important for hiring, because experience is always an advantage. Isagi remembers how Nea expertly helped them in the field last time, and dependable and focused on the job, she will give timely prompts and useful advice when needed. Rhodes, the son of a beekeeper, is fully confident in his endurance and strength but has no farming experience, and his strength makes him reliable for physical work. Nora helped on her father's large farm and handled bookkeeping at her mother's general store. Not as physically strong as the other workers, she is good with numbers and can handle small tasks and office work well. Ricardo was a hunter who also worked in the fields using seeds he got from Isagi, planting more of Isagi's seeds than any other villager. He seems to know how to work on a farm. Ragmant has as much farming experience as Ricardo. It wasn't clear if the man really wanted to hire him too. Ragmant can't understand why he was hired after saying so many rude things to Isagi at the banquet. The man said this was why he wanted to hire him. Isagi assumes Ragmund will not be embarrassed to ask him questions. Now the man guesses what's wrong. He requests permission to question Isagi directly in that case, as it would be his duty. His straightforwardness was appreciated. Mercia brought rakes, a hose, and sides, and now asks the workers to help with the harvest, while Nea asked what they would need to harvest now, and no one could imagine how much work actually awaited them. She started reading the list of vegetables they had to pick that day. It listed tomatoes, cucumbers, eggplant, bell peppers, and Chinese cabbage. In fact, many more vegetables and fruits grow on the farm. Before the girl could finish reading the list, Nea said it might be too much to collect in a single day. She said that was exactly why she wanted the workers to help them. Mershechka noted that despite the hard work, the salary is quite high, and the Sayanasagi do not object if the workers want to take part of the harvest with them, making the conditions very favorable. Mercia put her hand on Nea's shoulder and smiled, as if kindly urging the workers to do their best, a smile that suggested they had no choice. The workers were stunned by the girl's aura and hurried to work, feeling it best to perform their duties properly and follow all the required rules and conditions. Mercy asked Isagi to focus on the workshop tasks and leave everything else to her. He had no choice but to agree because he respects her completely and cannot take her seriousness lightly. At this spot, the boys began working in the field. Everyone went straight to the work they were hired for. Mercia carefully explained how to use each tool the workers had been given. Everyone listened closely to the girl's explanation. They were pleased and eager to learn something new. Mercy showed Ragmont exactly how to hold a knife and pick a cabbage. Ragmont listened while holding a cabbage in both hands. Walking to work, Nea saw an apple tree full of fruit. Her eyes lit up at once, but she felt awkward picking even a single apple with Mercio only a few steps away, since they could get their share of fruits and vegetables after work. The team works hard, and some find the job very tough, while those with enough strength and endurance have no trouble. With the boys working in the field, Isagi focused on the produce in the workshop. It was clear the fruit still needed more time to ripen. The new workers let him spend far more time on it. Strawberries, apples, and bananas proved to work well, but to grow them on a large farm, we need a few more varieties to boost their survival and resistance to environmental conditions. At this rate, we will have to expand the workshop. While thinking this, the boy saw Mercia working in the field. Isagi realizes the girl helps him with housework, workshop tasks, and even farm work. She always overdoes it. Isagi suddenly remembered the girl's question about grapes. Being so absorbed in the topic, she briefly lost herself imagining bunches of large, sweet berries. Isagi knows growing grapes will take a long time, but he will try and is determined to complete the work of developing and growing new varieties of vegetables and fruits. Isagi pulls a muscle in his back. The work in the workshop appears finished, with stacks of papers lying chaotically across every surface in some areas. He knows that everyone should wake up soon. Isagi realizes the workers had a hard first day and considers how to thank them for their work. An idea suddenly comes to mind. Isagi hurried to the cabinet, assuming he had a little more time to craft a magical tool that would greatly improve the farm's working conditions. At the castle, the boy spent his free time drafting plans for magical instruments. His notes are only sketches, but if combined, they could create something useful for all workers. Materials are scarce, so some ideas can't be implemented simply. Some notes only have drawings and schematic images of the proposed inventions, making them hard to recreate. To his surprise, Isagi stops taking notes and discovers a drawing of a tool with a description that could help invent the device. Field work was suspended. Nea reached forward and stretched her arms. Her exhaustion from work was obvious without words. All the boys knew how hard farm work was and how much effort it required. All the boys gathered in the room and could barely speak. Everyone was resting after working hard in the field. Mercy assesses the workers and says they all worked hard. Ragman admitted he hadn't been this tired in a long time, and Rickard said he'd worked much harder today than he had on his own field, and no one had been ready for this much work, but everyone could imagine how hard it was. Exhausted but relieved, Rhodes was happy that he and the boys had managed to gather a lot of vegetables, since they would receive a decent payment and also keep some of the fruit they had collected. Ragnant looked at Nora and thought she did not seem tired at all. Lowering her head, she exhaled. Clearly exhausted, she said she exists only through feminine energy. The man didn't fully understand what she meant. Nora, with her last breath, said she did this every day. That fake laugh sounded anything but cheerful. After all, such hard work was not quite suitable for a little girl. Entering the room, he thanked the team for their work, asked them to sit for a moment to show something, and they sat and listened closely to the man they were all very interested in. Usagi holds out an object wrapped in cloth, says it is a gift for his workers, and is happy it will brighten their workdays. Surprised, everyone leaned in to examine the unidentified object. Isagi pulls off the cloth and shows the men the first test mixer. Proud of his invention, he plans to show how it works. At first, they didn't understand the object's purpose or why it was needed, and Isagi explained it was a magical tool and that his work would surprise the workers and change how they saw fruits and vegetables. The man explained that the bottom base contains a magic fragment with no attributes, and if you allow the magical energy to flow, the blade on top will begin to rotate. The workers thought he was speaking an incomprehensible language. Mercia brought a board of chopped fruit and put the fruit into the mixer. To make the magic device work, he will add water and a bit of magic power to get one thing. The mixers began making a very loud grinding noise as they shredded the vegetables inside. Nea was shocked to see precious vegetables used that way and felt it showed the wrong attitude towards fruits and vegetables. Did the man not hear the girl's screams at all? Isagi told me to calm down and just look at the result. What he produced only surprised the workers. With soggy hands, he passed the glass of freshly squeezed apple juice to the boys. All the workers were amazed that Isagi could make apple juice from only 2 ingredients. They called it supernatural. The man asked which kids wanted a drink. Everyone reached out at once, eager to try the juices. Exhausted from working on the farm, they now had the chance to try a new drink to quench their thirst. Everyone enjoyed the taste of the drink. An image of shiny, juicy apples dripping with juice came to mind. The sight of sunlit, juicy fruit gave the children a warm feeling. Nia, Rhodes, and Ricardo were delighted that ordinary apples steeped in water produced such a richly sweet apple drink, and its taste was superb. Isaki winked at the boys, pleased that they liked the drink. Nora and Ragman appear behind the man with empty glasses, both wanting to try the wonderful drink. Isagi asked the two to wait while he washed the dishes first. This time he used milk instead of water to make the drink easier to swallow, but milk is milder and switching to it requires altering the ingredients themselves, which gives the drink an unusual taste. Now Isagi will make banana and strawberry milk. The new drinks were unlike anything anyone had imagined before. Nora and Ragman began to taste them. Nora felt the sweet aroma and taste of bright strawberries spread through her body, and she suddenly felt so happy that the drink made her feel as if she could fly right now. The exhausted boys vanished as if by magic. Ragman also appreciated the drink, feeling it give him strength. Nair admitted this was the first time she'd tasted such delicious juice. Ricardo felt ready to fight tomorrow after that juice. He planned to harvest even more than today. All workers were again convinced that working conditions remained at the highest level. Seeing the kids enjoy the juice made him very happy and proved his efforts were worth it. Nea sees the banana milk looks tasty and wants to try it too. Isagi agrees but needs to wash the bottle again first. Mercy will listen to their conversations, smiling. She is glad Isagi got along with the guys so easily. Mercia expected no less from the gentleman. At first, Isagi did not understand what they were talking about. Mercy suspected the man had a tactic to hook workers on tasty fruits so they could not escape, and she noted he was skilled at the carrot and stick method. The soggy one didn't even think about it. It would be great if the kids had some fun working on the farm. Mercia agreed with the idea, completely sharing the man's opinion, while the girl thought exactly the same as her master. Without warning, Asagi hands Mercy a glass. The man guessed the woman was tired too and hadn't tried the drinks yet. Deliberately picking up a glass, he suggested they try it together before serving the others. Asagi has come up with a totally different drink. His imagination and ingenuity have no limits. Mercia smiled softly. Clinking glasses, they drain them to toast their efforts after a difficult day. On this sunny day, Mercia asks Asagi to check and tidy the crops as usual, and he does not object, staying calm because she always helps him. After 6 weeks of work, he and the boys have the farm in Mercia running at full capacity with 5 workers, and their efforts are finally paying off where everyone can see it. Their farm had grown very large, with ordinary fields, a plantation of medicinal plants, wheat fields, and an orchard, all needed for the farm to function properly. The company has grown so large, it is now clearly huge. Its many plots and plantations, and the countless fields are impossible to ignore. Isagi knows that at this scale, taking a detour is increasingly difficult. Then he had an idea. He asked the girl to wait while taking a little time to bring his idea to life. The man said he had a good idea, used refined copper to create a copper horse, and the result was indistinguishable from a real animal. The horse turned out to be a golem. He thought having a way to travel would be handy. Now there is a convenient vehicle for moving around and inspecting such large areas, saving time and effort. The girl thanked the gentleman warmly for all his help. Isaki decides to create a second such horse so the two of them can go around together. It turned out there weren't enough materials to make a second horse. They rode the same horse for all their rounds. Mercier was taken aback by the news. The girl didn't hold on to the man while riding, and her movements were awkward. Isji asked them to hold on tight, because riding without holding on to something was very dangerous. Mercia blushed, grabbed the gentleman's jacket with her hand, and felt pleased to be so close to him. The man spun around and heard someone purring behind him. He asked the girl if she had been doing it. Mercia looked away and said the man had only imagined it, then rested her head on Asagi's shoulder. Sie wanted to know what the sound might be in that case. Riding the copper horse was much more convenient because it went very fast and let the men save far more time than checking everything on foot. Isagi and Marcia arrived in Rhodes. Isagi worked on the site with the golems. He hadn't expected to see the boys but wished them a good morning. Rhodes always does his job properly and gives no reason to doubt him. The man said he had come to check the farm briefly and settle some things and asked them not to worry about him. Rhodes understood and stayed out of it. He approached one of the greenhouses. He notices that Pramino house keeps the temperature steady, is covered with a translucent film, and uses magical equipment to control it. He believes it's worth slowing plant growth and letting them develop more gradually because the optimal growth rate for fruits and vegetables matters. He inspects each bush carefully and measures the fruits. Mercia realizes the man is truly amazing. It turned out Asagi hadn't heard anything, and when he asked the girl about it, she said she hadn't said anything and turned away. Looking out the window, she thinks building such a large farm in the village is not something everyone can do, so her master is truly amazing and can set an example. After he had checked everything, he said they needed to go to the orchard and thoroughly inspect all the farm fields so they could detect any problems in the process of growing vegetables and fruits in time. Nea rushes up to Asagi and shouts that something has happened to the orchard, struggling to catch her breath, which alone shows the situation is very urgent. Instead of explaining, she guided them along. This is still the best decision. Every second counts and this news cannot be delayed. When the boys reached the orchard, they found every fruit smashed and spoiled, watermelon rinds scattered across the field, and the pulp torn and spread almost everywhere. Isagi and Mercia recoiled in horror at what they saw. No one could explain how it happened because it only happens in the rarest situations, the kind you can count on one hand. The fruit looked as if a storm had passed through, sweeping them across the field and hurling them to the ground so hard they shattered, but that would hardly be a natural disaster. Isagi asks Ni whether the same thing happened yesterday, and Ni shakes her head, saying nothing like that happened. While the sky outside is still clear, there was no sign of rain, let alone a storm, and it has been a long time. After finishing work, everything seemed normal, but by morning it had become terrible, and Nea could barely hold back her tears as she struggled to accept that she had allowed such a terrible thing to happen. When the boy asked if there was any more rotten fruit, the girl refused, saying the fruit was only rotten in that spot, which offered Nea no relief since the watermelon field was her responsibility. Relieved, the boy realized he was lucky that only the watermelons had gone bad, since damage to other fields would have caused massive harm and taken the farm a long time to recover. Nea clenched her fists in front of her. Shaking all over and in tears, she asks the man for forgiveness, never expecting such a big disaster in the field and now feeling guilty for not watching the harvest. You notice that the girl was worried about the harvest. Mercier moved to calm her, saying it wasn't her fault, and Isagi agreed that the fields cannot be watched even at night. First, Isagi began collecting all the damaged items, and the girls agreed to help. Wooden boxes held spoiled fruits, and insects flew above them. Isagi looked at the fruits and wondered how this had happened. A man suddenly spotted claw marks on one of the fruits. Near the field he found signs of wild animals, which could explain a lot and show why so much of the harvest was ruined. We now know it wasn't a human who did this. Mercy confirms and says she smells a faint scent of wild animals. Everything has become clear to the boys, and they know who the culprit is. Nea interrupts and asks them to come see something she found that can help confirm the man's guess about the wild animal's guilt. It turned out the girl found a black tuft of wool. The man said it could be a black wolf. These powerful wild animals cause a lot of trouble because they have to find their own food. Neu was surprised the boy could tell that just by touching a piece of wool. He said he was good at analyzing materials. Isagi skillfully disassembled the material the girl had found. Mercia thought the wild animals around the watermelon pane were drawn by the fruit's sweet smell and came down from the mountains at night. Nea was worried this might happen again today. Mercy said it would definitely happen again, like bears that once tasted human flesh and would attack and ruin people's lives again, an example that was creepy but convincing. This information scares Nea even more, and she worries what they should do next because wild animals are too dangerous, and giving away the harvest for free will only harm the farm's income and its workers. The enemy is an agile monster with a powerful attack. Facing it in the farm's open fields would be a bad idea. Here, the man suggests performing in the watermelon field where the fruit was destroyed. The boy asked Nea to call Ragment and Ricardo to defend the farm, but they do not need to risk their lives for it. Obeying, she sprinted away as fast as she could. He ordered the golems to stop their work for now, since protecting the farm is the top priority, and he and Mercia must make a clear plan because their future together depends on it. Mounting his horse, the boy rode into the forest to follow the tracks of wild animals. Mercy jumped on her horse and said she would definitely go with a master because she believes Isagi may need help at any moment. It sounded like he said he'd speed up a bit so the girl would have to hold on tight. Mercia did not object. They were determined to find out why the watermelons in the field had spoiled. The boys are already deep in the forest. One boy asks the girl if the tracks they found match those in the watermelon field. That was important to confirm his guesses made on the farm. She confirmed it, noting the tracks ran deep into the forest and a faint animal smell lingered, all pointing to wild animals as the cause of the crop damage. Suddenly, Mercia sees a large pack of wild animals sprinting right beside them. They were suddenly so close that the boys did not expect to see them walking almost side by side. During the incident, the boys were surrounded by wild animals. They were shadow wolves, and the man was right when he touched a tuft of wool a worker accidentally found in the field. Isagi realizes he should have seen this coming. Bringing his friends for backup would have helped. He hadn't expected them to be able to handle a pack of wild beasts far stronger than humans. The boy asks Mercier if she can take on the shadow wolf. However, the girl is only half sure of this. Still, she remains confident and is definitely ready to stand up for herself and her master. Isagi realizes the enemy is so strong that even Mercia does not know if he can defeat him. According to his battle tactics, helping him would increase their chances of victory, but the black wolves will not allow it. Carefully, he eases his hand out of the glove. Mercia steps in front of him and says she will buy time so he can run away. It was a very bold decision. The girl's words shocked Isagi. He had not expected Mercia to take such a bold risk, since she could be left alone in the forest with wild animals. Angry, he said he could not leave her or run away. He knows it's irrational, but as the only man present, he cannot withhold mercy. Feeling he has no right to do this, Isagi grabs the girl's shoulders and says she stood by him even after he was kicked out of the imperial castle. Isagi says that even if he gets into trouble again, he still cannot leave her, and he believes he must be with Mercia in the most dangerous moments because they are much stronger together. These words moved Mercia. The touching moment was cut short by the wolf's evil laughter. The boys immediately turned toward the source of the laughter. They could not tell exactly where the wild animal was hiding. One of the shadow wolves saw humans as foolish for thinking they had time to argue and felt they were taking too many liberties with their precious time. The boy realized the wolf was so intelligent it could both speak and understand them, which was surprising but not unexpected from a wild magical creature. Isagi figured the wolf might just be toying with them. If it wasn't going to attack, the boy still had a chance to reach an agreement. He had an idea that could let them avoid using force. Isagi shouts that he wants to make a deal with the wolf, shocking Mercio and surprising the girl who never expected the master to risk approaching the wolf with a bargain knowing he could be defeated. The wolf was surprised and asked again whether the man truly wanted to make a deal with them, the monsters. No one had ever dared that before. Then an unusually brave man stepped forward toward the wild beast. The man confirms the conversation will be short and profitable, and the wolf comes down to him, clearly interested, letting him try to speak. His mouth moves toward the guy. A terrifying voice says that if he gets bored, he will be forced to defeat Isagi, and though it's frightening, at a time like this, you simply can't give up. The man clutched the glove even tighter. He asks the wolf whether the watermelons that grew on his farm were eaten last night. The wolf now knows the fruit is called watermelons. He plans to go down and eat some tonight too. The man warned that if the wolf keeps eating watermelons, there won't be any left. If that happens, the wolf will find others, and is confident those fruits and berries will be replaced. The man threw up his hands and said that, unfortunately, only they know how to grow these watermelons, which shocked all the wolves nearby, and even the wolf conducting the negotiations had not expected that. The wolf grew angry and asked what the boy would demand in that case. The wolf thought Isagi wanted the wolves to leave if the watermelons disappeared. The wolf was wary because their food source could vanish so easily. The man says this is not true at all. He will give the wolves watermelons and other grown vegetables and fruits, but he will also demand something in return here. The wolves seemed interested, and they really liked the watermelons because they kept listening to the man and his conditions so calmly and meekly. In exchange, Isagi wants the wolves to guard his farm. Furious, the wolf shouted that the boy would treat them like guard dogs, a treatment he and his pack had neither expected nor approved. Wolf dropped into a fighting stance, ready to pounce. Mercy sensed trouble and was deeply worried for her master. One wrong word could keep them from ever returning to their village farm. Isagi said it depends on the wolf's point of view. From a wolf's point of view, the man says they are like livestock that keep providing tasty food. The men's conclusions were perfectly logical and based on the wolf's statement, and the wolf was surprised by their reasoning. On his farm, he said, there were many other tasty foods besides watermelons. By then the wolves had calmed and seemed fully interested in the deal. The boy asks about the wolf's decision. The wild animals were determined. They wanted a permanent place to eat. Night fell and darkness settled. The farm is now fully prepared for defense. Men stand along its border with weapons and farm cleaning equipment. They are determined to protect the farm. Nii suddenly spots a faint light in the distance. The boys realized that Mercy and Isagi had returned, and everyone was glad the boys were back safe after being gone so long. The boy asked to be forgiven for being so late. The golem's horse broke down, so they had to continue without it. They still reached the village safely. Marcia remained silent. Naya feared the boys might be hurt. Fortunately, he said, everything worked out, and everyone was glad those who came were alive and well, though they were still worried about Isagi and Mercia. She wonders whether the boys managed to tame the black wolves. The man hesitated and asked everyone to listen calmly, but before he could begin his speech, someone asked to leave. He called for silence because he was about to explain everything to the others. The moment proved exciting because not everyone can grasp how an ordinary person and a wild animal can cooperate. A black ear appeared beside the man's boot. Seconds later, a massive shadow wolf head emerged. The remaining guards at the farm were terrified. No one had expected the monster to be so close. The boy realized there was a monster hiding in Isagi's shadow. Isagi raised his hand and asked the boys to calm down. They needed time to hear what the man had to say and understand it so they would not be so afraid of the guests. One day in the forest, a wolf offered a man a deal. The wolf warned that if the boy failed to satisfy its hunger, the deal would end immediately. Isagi still agreed. The farmer is confident his farm matches any other in productivity and taste. Confident, the wolf was very happy. Now he can be sure his pack will have a steady source of food. Ragnant had not expected someone so remarkable to be near the village, and Ricardo admired the boy for offering a deal to such a fearsome monster because few people could show that kind of generosity. Isaki believes there is no need to worry about attacks anymore, so the team can calmly return to work, and everyone understood and did not object because this is for the good of the farm and its workers. A voice suddenly comes from the man's shadow, asking whether it's finally possible to get out. Isagi grants permission, and instantly a shadow monster emerges from a shadow. The monster shakes loose its fur. He immediately suggests they review the duties again. This is important because the conditions will be discussed in front of all employees, so everyone understands what is happening. Isagi says the wolf's duty is to protect the farm, mostly at night. The wolf has no objection and asks for fruits and vegetables in return. The deal is straightforward, but a few more rules still need to be set. The man thought about how much the harvest would yield. Mercia volunteered to handle the matter, confident she could explain things to the wolf briefly and clearly, and persuade him to agree to the deal. The girl said they would feed the village guard each day until he was full, and every 5 days they would give enough food for the whole pack. The wolf thought it was a good deal and agreed anyway, then wondered how advanced their farming must be to produce so much food every 5 days. The man chose to discuss the rules in general. The wolf hadn't realized there would be rules as well as duties. He explained it was an agreement for them to live together comfortably. The wolf listened patiently as the man told it not to attack people, not to break things, not to touch the farm's harvest without permission, not to spoil anything, and to help save other workers from monsters. The wolf stamped his paw and cut the boy off. He said their duty is only to protect the farm and that he does not care about other people. The wolf's mood shifts often, which is typical for a wild animal. Isagi explained it this way: without workers the crops won't grow, so he wants the wolf to see them as part of the farm, which is the most logical reason to protect the other workers too. The wolf admits there is some truth in the boy's words, but he cannot promise to protect everyone. Though strong, he is far from omnipotent, and even strength, agility, and endurance have limits. Even so, this is enough for Isagi. The wolf hissed in annoyance. Bending down, he told his pack about the business and ordered the others to come out, review the deal one last time, and get to work. Other wolves stepped out from the chief wolf's shadow, sat before him to hear his command, and all accepted the leader's order without objecting to the deal. The wolf ordered them to follow the rules and fulfill their duties. The man noticed that moving through shadows was a very useful ability. Almost everything a strong, agile beast needs was gained quickly and easily. Mercier is considering going to the village to explain the situation to her father and the villagers. The boy asked her politely to do it. All that remains is to tell the others the news so they can get to work. Wolf code is soggy. Since they were heading to the village now, he asked whether the wolves could expect watermelons, and that was perfectly logical given the deal both parties had agreed to. The man agreed anyway and said he would lead the wolves to the watermelon field now. Isagi checked every watermelon to make sure it was sweet. "Please wait a moment before cutting the fruit," he asked. When the wolves began guarding the plantation, peace returned. The residents no longer worry about attacks that could ruin their harvest, and the wolves no longer worry about where to find food. Nearly 30 black wolves joined the guard. The earlier damage from deer and boars was paid for. The cubs often played on the farm, and Mercia smiled as she asked them to stop. Mercia and the pack leader walked through the city. Kokura watched the wolves enjoying the road, brushing their heads, and couldn't understand how it had come to this. Such fierce, outwardly stern animals had become so obedient. The wolf thinks the demons live in harmony with nature, so the key thing is that people don't mind them, and Mercy smiled because she found the wolf's objections about living among humans amusing. With the wolf's help, Azagi can spend more time on research, focus on science, and breed new varieties of fruits and vegetables, because he no longer has to worry about protecting the farm. Carrying a notebook, he went down to the basement of the house. The basement was a storage room, filled with dried herbs, fresh greens, and even ore, clearly kept so everything could be studied calmly. Isagi wanted to improve the harvest, so he built an underground experimental farm and now needs to collect data to use in his future research. Using a magical device that stores sunlight, Isagi generates light in his underground farm so he does not have to worry about lighting the laboratory. Unfinished crops can grow unpredictably. The underground experimental farm grows crops that are under study. Okra proved unstable in both growth and nutritional value, and broccoli absorbs too many nutrients and damages the soil, so the farmer realized these crops are not yet suitable for the farm. Planning to go further, Isagi called Mercia to make sure she was not nearby. He did not want her to know what he was preparing, because it was a very important matter. When he touched the wall with his poem, it seemed to dissolve immediately. Heavy bunches of grapes with carved leaves hung from the ceiling, each berry gleaming like mother of pearl and catching the light. The grapes looked perfect, as if an artist had painted them in oil. He wanted to know what it tasted like. The group's food tasted very sour. You cannot always grow a perfect crop in a short time. Sometimes it takes several weeks. The seeds vary in size and are hard to eat. The boy knew it was hard to balance fertility and taste. Isagi even considered giving up mass production. Isagi suddenly remembers how interested Mercia looked during their conversation about grapes, and realizes he can't stop and must keep trying so he can thank her for everything she did. He knows Mercia has done too much for them, so in gratitude, he must give her the finest grapes, and he is sure the chosen culture can implement his idea as intended. Suddenly, Isagi heard a voice in the lab. In an instant, he ran out, and the wall behind him looked completely ordinary. Isagi peeked out from behind the plant stand and saw Mercia, who already knew the gentleman was in the basement, and after so many years together, could tell where he was and what he was doing. Mercy looked at Isagi with an unkind expression and said he had been working too much lately. The girl had noticed the guy had spent the last 2 weeks in the workshop. It turns out he doesn't notice at all how fast time passes. Mercia sighed, her gaze softening with pity. She warned him that if he kept it up, he could get sick. Isagi considered taking a day off. The guy has no idea what to do on weekends. It seems Isagi hasn't rested in a long time or ever, so he'll need Mercy here too. Mercia went ahead with a picnic because the weather was nice. A beautiful flower garden was nearby, and her knowledge always helped in situations like this. The man really liked the idea and suggested they start cooking right away so they'd have time to go on a picnic today. Mercier had already prepared everything. Mercier showed the gentleman the basket of food. Isagi thought it was great and wanted to invite the other employees, but it turns out Mercy has already done that, and the others will join when they finish their work. He thanked her for coordinating their actions. As the man closed the door and stepped outside, a shadowy figure crawled out of his shadow. It appears without warning and often scares people nearby. The boy wondered how the wolf had managed to stand in his shadow, and this time he could not help being frightened by the beast so close. The wolf said that as a farm employee, he also wanted to take part in the picnic. The boy was surprised that Gakuro, the wolf, also wanted to join the picnic. Gakuro looked away and made it clear he wanted to go with the boys and did not want to explain anything else. The sun is shining brightly outdoors. Mercia, Isagi, and Kokuro went on a picnic, walking through the city, the forest, and the meadows until they reached a flower garden surrounded by the wide areas they had walked through. Entering the garden, the boy was amazed by the beautiful view. Vast fields of flowers spread out, perfectly pristine. A lone tree dropped flower petals onto the boys. She said they had already arrived. The garden had so many flowers that their types could not all be listed. The man had not known such a beautiful garden existed near the village, and the abundance of blooms only added to its beauty. Isaki started examining the flowers carefully. The girl watched him calmly and with care. She was glad the gentleman could finally take a day off and relax. The young man had no idea there was such a beautiful garden near the village. A man wanted the names of some flowers. Mercia knew every flower in the garden and named each one he asked about with some pride. Isagi found it interesting that the girl knew so many flowers while he only knew what they were made of, and that still wasn't enough to simply enjoy a nice day in such a pleasant place. A man asked Mercia if he could pick some flowers. She agreed, but it was unclear why he needed them right then. Using magic, he transforms the petals into a flower of a different color. Mercia noticed at once that the Hansanya petals had turned blue, even though they had been pure white only seconds earlier. He explained he used alchemy to change the flower's elemental gradients. Handing the altered flower to the girl, he says it's for her. Now it's clear why he needed the flower from the garden. Mercia had not expected the gift and felt embarrassed by it. The boys stood for a while holding the flowers out. The wolf did not mind and fell asleep in the sweet-smelling flowers. The man realized something. Apologizing, he realized he hadn't meant to give Mercy a flower out of the blue. It seemed reckless and foolish, and he hadn't wanted to show mercy that way. The boy lowers his hand holding the flower. Isagi thought he might be annoying the girl. That made him sad because Mercia does a lot for him and often cannot find time for herself. Mercy suddenly took the flower from the boy's hands, said he had not irritated her at all, and was genuinely pleased by Isagi's unexpected gift, since the moment itself was enough to please her. The girl does not realize that the guy knows something. In fact, Mercia was surprised because giving a hands-on gift to the opposite sex carries a special meaning. The guy was surprised by this because he did not know what it meant. He asked what this gesture meant. Turning away, the girl smiled and said it was a secret. Pressing an index finger to her lips, she made it clear it should be kept quiet. Isagi flinches and asks for the flower back, but Mercy refuses, saying the flower is hers now since Isagi gave it to her. Turning away, she breathed in the flower's enchanting scent. A tender, sensual moment was interrupted when the wolf woke from a deep sleep. Kokuro, hungry, suggested they start eating since they'd been in the garden for a while and the table still wasn't set. The boys laid a blanket under the tree. Mercia opened the basket and announced they had sandwiches today. The girl did her best to keep Isagi from worrying about the picnic. Seeing what was in the basket, Isagi and Kokoro were stunned. The basket held a huge number of sandwiches in many flavors and types, and the wolf grew even hungrier and asked for his share right away. The man smiled and said he would cut a piece for him right away. Cut in half, the sandwich showed every layer of filling in its cross-section. The boys eagerly ate the tasty sandwiches. The juicy thick ham, crisp lettuce, and tomatoes as sweet as fruit with the right tang made an incredible impression. The man was surprised at how delicious the vegetables grown on their farm were. Mercia also noted that the vegetables the gentleman improved had a distinctive flavor. These facts clearly complement each other. Isagi stared at Marcia's sandwich. Noticing the thick tomatoes and the same cabbage, he decided it must be incredibly delicious. Kakuro did not care at all about the combination. The wolf asked whether the boys had ready-made watermelon sandwiches. Isagi can't understand how anyone would eat them and thinks this type of crop should be eaten just as it is. Isagi finds this combination very strange. There are watermelon sandwiches, and Marcia went to the trouble of making them. The guys ate sweet watermelon and yogurt sandwiches, and the classic salted watermelon and cheese salad. It actually sounded really tasty. Mercia asked if Mr. Isagi wanted to try some of the sandwiches, and he would really like to, while the wolf was already gobbling treats with its favorite watermelon. A man tried the sandwich. The watermelon's refreshing sweetness and the yogurt's tang went well together. He realized watermelon can be delicious in sandwiches. Isagi never liked the capital's overly sweet treats. This watermelon sandwich has a pleasant sweet and salty flavor. Mercy's efforts were not in vain, proving she can make any fruit taste delicious. Grateful, the boy thanked Mercia for the treat and said it tasted very good. The wolf was already asleep, licking his lips after the meal. Kokuro said it tasted good only because of the watermelon. Isagi said only Mercia can make watermelon taste this good, and a better combination is simply impossible. Hearing those words, the girl felt very pleased. The man started his second sandwich, enjoying the classic flavor. The woman watched him with a smile. The boys relaxed under the tree, carefree and glad to rest so peacefully at that moment. A girl in the field suddenly waves her hand and says their friends have already started eating, and the other workers have finished the tasks Marcia assigned and hurried off to rest. Nea and the others were there, all very hungry after work and heading to join Isagi and Mercia to try the sandwiches Mercia had made. The boy felt relieved that the other boys had already finished all the work. Mercia disagreed and thought the boys should have been given much more to do. The girl only wanted a little more time with the master. The guy asked the girl what she meant. Smiling, she said there was nothing wrong and suggested they spread out more. All the guys joined in with the vacationers. Everyone was very happy to have a day off like that. Konya says good morning, represents a wonderful chamber of commerce, and everyone replies in kind because she is always friendly to other people, traders and customers, and a pleasure to work with. Isagi saw the girl buying the harvest as usual, and Koni confirmed it while thanking the boy, who pointed out that it was their harvest and that they had collected a large amount this time. Kanai discovered a large pile of boxes and barrels of goods and thanked Isagi, very happy because she now has more stock to sell at the markets. Konya told her boys to start work, and all the carts were loaded with goods to the top. Her expression changed suddenly. Isagi noticed and asked her what had happened. A letter from Mercia told Ponia the guards were demons. A man confirmed it. Isagi said they were shadow and black wolves, and when the man asked if they needed to be called, the girl did not refuse. Isagi waved a shadow wolf closer, and seeing the cute creature made Konya very happy, but wild animals are always unpredictable. She asked if she could touch the wolf, and Isagi said it would be fine if the wolf allowed it. As soon as the girl reached up to the wolf's head, her hat flew off. Holding the hat in his mouth, the wolf sprang away from the girl, glanced at her, and made it clear he had found a new toy he would not give up so easily. She grabbed her head because it was her favorite hat, then ran at the wolf as fast as she could, yelling for him to give it back, and the wolf had not expected such speed but still refused to give up. Out of time to reach the wolf, the girl fell face down, and later she asked where the black wolf had suddenly gone, while a voice from the man's shadow said the wolf would not be caught so easily. From the boy's shadow, Gokuro steps out and apologizes to the girl, holding her hat in his teeth, and Kanai suddenly jumps on the wolf, shouting that she finally caught him, while the girl clutches the animal's thick fur. Kokuro couldn't move. Kanya kept screaming at him to give him the hat, and the wolf agreed only if the girl stopped screaming in his ear. Out of the blue, Isagi asked Kanya to raise trade volume to about 1.5 times the current level. Kanya thought it was a good offer. Given so many carts and the allotted spaces, it's hard to do now. She guessed he now has a surplus of produce. They've grown so many fruits and vegetables there's nowhere to put them. She suggested they go into town to sell the extra vegetables and fruit. This was the first time the boy had heard of it. Konya said there was a city called Melon, only a day's journey away. Isagi remembered that he and Marcia had stopped there on their way to the village. Melen, the nearest town to this village, is quite lively. If they go to the free market and rent a stall, they can trade freely. That way, Isagi can sell her fruits. The girl is confident that if the produce comes from Isagi's farm, the fruits and vegetables will sell well. After all, her harvest is always high quality. Mercio was surprised to hear that the man planned to sell the fruit from his stock, and the girl liked the idea because she had been thinking of buying more household supplies. Nea wanted to go to the city and asked to come along. Mercia asked why Nea wanted to go as well. Nea wanted everyone to know how delicious their farm's harvest was, and only she could spread that news. Smiling, he asked her the real reason for going to the city. Nea said she'd been working very hard and wanted to visit the city sometimes to have fun. A second later, she realized what she'd said. Isagi set her up. The man realized the woman had revealed her true intentions. She may have wanted to make a strong ad for Isagi's harvest, but that was not her main goal. Mercy said they weren't going for fun but for business, and Nee said it didn't matter because she just wanted to get out of the village. At last, both girls stared at the man waiting for his final decision, and when he let Nate go, the girl ran off to pack her things. Mercia said Isagi took the girl on the trip because they were childhood friends, but the man disagreed, saying he and Mercia would be busy with sales and Nea would be serving customers. Marcia agreed to do her best and let Nea handle the customers. Nea hurried out to the group and got ready for the trip. Nea wore a cropped shirt and shorts. Mercia noticed the girl looked different. Nee said the clothes were for going into the city. Nee was eager to go and seemed to have been waiting for this moment for a long time. Nea asked Mercy, sounding a little puzzled, why she wasn't wearing something pretty for a change. Mercy explained she was working and simply had no time, even though she wanted to. Nea said it was rather boring and wished she could see Mercia in nicer clothes more often, since Mercia is clearly very beautiful outside work, but doesn't have enough time for it. Mercia urged Isagi to hurry. If they left now, they would have just enough time to return by nightfall. Isagi agreed, and the man said that with the golem horses they could reach the destination in 3 hours. Mercia remembered the last ride on the golem horses with the guy and blushed, covering her face with her palm, as memories of riding pressed tightly against him ran through her head. There were 3 horses, exactly enough for everyone. Isagi had enough materials to make everyone move faster and save time. Nea was very happy to get a golem too. It turned out the guy had recently received new materials, including copper needed to build a golem. Isagi was very happy that everything had worked out so conveniently. Seeing Mercy in a bad mood, he asked what was wrong. Mercy looked so upset she seemed miserable because she thought she would have to ride with the guy on the same horse again and be closer to him. Mercia kept her expression as she mounted her horse and called for preparations to leave. The boy assumed she disliked the horse's appearance. Isagi often found the girl's true emotions hard to read. The boys set off, galloping across the endless fields, and Nea was delighted they took her and gave her a horse of her own so she could finally enjoy the freedom she'd long wanted. Nea called out that she could finally see the city. Isagi was delighted by the news. From behind the strong, reliable wall, the others could already make out the tops of the houses. The boys entered the city through a large arch, joined by a large stream of other people. Mercia skillfully jumped off her horse to continue on foot. They walked quite a long way. The boys walked through Milan. The streets were packed with people and magical creatures. Nea was curious about nearly every resident, and Isagi realized the city was enormous. Standing on the road to the large arches that seemed to lead to the city center, the boys saw countless merchants who had come to the city to sell their goods. Nea assumed the guys were in the city for the first time, but Isagi said he had been to Milan before, and on that trip, he was on business so had no time to see the sights and simply changed maps. Nea was glad the boys could take their time to look around today, and Isagi still agreed, so they could now explore the city and trade properly. First, the boys must sell their supplies and earn money. Neha was eager to help Isagi and Mercia with that. Mercia and Isagi suddenly froze when they noticed something in the crowd. Mercy froze when she saw the beautiful jewelry behind the glass display cases. Precious stones shimmered in the sun as if beckoning, and the chains that held them looked light and elegant. Isagi remembered the time the girl was very interested in something, so he asked Mercia if she liked it, but she refused and said it was not true. Isagi knows what interests Mercia and sees she hides her emotions poorly. He plans to give her something after work as a pleasant surprise. They arrived at the market. It was packed with tents selling all kinds of goods. After he paid for a spot, he set up his tent. Now they need to lay out their goods. Isagi was proud of how he'd arranged the goods, with boxes of fruits and vegetables on the shelves, but Nea was not impressed and thought the produce should look more attractive. The girl found the counter unattractive. Mercia and Isagi thought they kept things very simple and that their fruits were tasty. They believed the counter showed that. He frowned, hoping the boys knew the buyers had no idea how delicious the fruits and vegetables on their farm were, and tried to make that clear. Mercia and Isagi stared in amazement, as if the idea had just occurred to them and they had never guessed it before, and NEA began to explain what needed to be done to fix the situation on the counter. The girl carefully examined the boxes of fruits and vegetables. Nea suggested offering not only the fruits themselves, but also fruit juice. It was fortunate that Isagi had a blender with him. NEA decided serving the food in pretty containers would be a good idea, and Mercia had many lovely baskets from the village that would enhance the presentation. Nea decided to gather some fruit and put them together, while Mercia and Isagi watched with interest to see what she would make. Then she packed the assortment into a basket that cost 3 silver coins. This arrangement looked simply superb, and the basket would be an ideal gift or souvenir, so Nea watched her work with pride as she waited for buyers, while the man wondered if anyone would buy it.